Chapter 1031. Yang Qindong had just experienced a fierce battle in the afternoon. From his point of view, the toughest moment had yet to arrive. The darkness before dawn was the most dangerous. In the main tent of the Siamese army, Tong Si was fuming. After an afternoon of all-out attacks, more than 10,000 soldiers had died and countless were injured. Most of the injuries were caused by his own soldiers trampling each other as they retreated. He could not accept this result. After 2 battles, he had a rough idea of Yang Qindong's military strength. It was less than 10,000 soldiers. However, in the afternoon he had sent out 80,000 soldiers to attack from 4 different directions. Not only had none of them made it to the barren mountains, they hadn't injured a single enemy. Moreover, they had suffered such great losses. How could he not be enraged? After venting his anger, Tong Si was in a much better mood. He started to summarize his failures and quickly made 2 important improvements. First, a large reward. Second, an inspection team was set up. The reward was announced publicly. Anyone who captured Yang Qindong alive would be rewarded 10,000 taels of silver and a promotion of 5 ranks. Anyone who killed Yang Qindong would be rewarded 8,000 taels of silver and a promotion of 4 ranks. As the saying went, when there was a large reward, there would be brave men. He believed that this method would be effective on normal soldiers. After all, once this matter was completed, it would change their lives. The inspection team was specially prepared to deal with soldiers who fled in defeat. It was not enough to motivate them with money. They also had to place a lock behind the soldiers. Once they retreated, they would be killed without mercy. In that case, he believed that even if he was tired, he would be able to exhaust the 5-star army to death. Not only these 2, Tong Si also decided to launch an attack at night. Although they were not good at night battles, they could only send the remaining 20 cannons up with the help of the night. Not only that, he also mobilized the remaining 10,000 cavalrymen. His experience during the day told him that the 5-star army was better than the cavalrymen. However, they were not without weaknesses. For example, in terms of numbers, the enemy was at a disadvantage. The 5-star army had a limited number of cavalrymen. They might be able to defend against the cavalrymen in one direction, but what if they attacked in all directions? The shadow cavalry would not be able to disperse their forces. He constantly changed his attack methods and made various preparations. 4 hours later, a set of effective attack methods in Tong's eyes was formulated. In order for the plan to be carried out smoothly, he mobilized a total of 120,000 soldiers to prepare for the attack. I don't believe that 120,000 of us can't defeat you. If we can't, reinforcements will arrive at any time. I want to see if you are made of iron. After Tong Si finished speaking, he began to issue the attack plan and order to his subordinates. Even at night, the weather in June was still very hot. A light breeze blew, and the stench of blood filled the barren hills. However, the soldiers of the 5-star army acted as if they didn't hear anything. They leaned against the trenches and slept. A good warrior must first learn how to rest, learn how to keep oneself in the best condition. Everyone pay attention. The enemy's cannons are coming up. In the silence, the scout on duty discovered something and shouted. Boom, boom, boom. As soon as he shouted, the sound of cannons rang out. Then heavy cannons landed around the barren hills, causing the ground to tremble. When the cannons landed outside the trenches, all the soldiers were awakened from their sleep. Yang Qindong was also awakened the moment the cannons landed. Then, he felt the throbbing of the white dragon horse beside him. He stretched out his arm and gently stroked the horse while listening to the direction of the cannons. As the best soldier king in the past, it could be said that he had spent half of his life dealing with guns and cannons. In this aspect, he had a sense of alertness that others did not have. The direction is northwest. Order the cannons to counterattack. Based on his experience, after roughly determining the location of the enemy's cannons, Yang Qindong decisively gave the order to counterattack. Beta Persei, who had been waiting by the side, immediately shouted with his unique loud voice. Then the cannoneers began to load the cannons. Then the cannoneers fired the cannons and landed 2.5 miles northwest. Boom, boom, boom. The 5-star army's rapid counterattack blew up 20 cannons of the Siamese army. When he saw that the 20 cannons had been blown up into scrap metal after only 1 round of cannons, Tong jumped up in exasperation. Attack, attack, attack on all fronts. Whoever kills Yang Qindong will be heavily rewarded and given the title of nobility. Kill. As Tong shouted, the first echelon of the Siamese army rushed out from 4 directions. At the same time, the first echelon of the Siamese army also rushed out. In the dark night, a full-scale attack began. Attack, cover the area with cannons and machine guns. If the enemy is close, throw grenades. Don't let the enemy rush up the barren hills. Yang Chendong walked out of the trenches and shouted loudly. He had already heard the sound of iron horses galloping from all directions. He knew very well that the enemy had divided their forces. Since that was the case, his role in leading the cavalry out was very limited. Furthermore, in the dark, visibility was limited. The speed of the war horses was very fast. If they really rushed out, the danger would only increase. Therefore, he left his war horse in the trenches and walked into the trenches with a Type 95 in his hand. Following Yang Chendong's orders, the cannons began their counterattack. Since there were many enemies, no one knew how many enemies would be killed at any point of attack. The machine guns of the Type 95 squad did not stop for even a moment. They continuously shot out bullets, trying their best to destroy the approaching enemies and blast them away. The sound of gunshots was like firecrackers. Bullets were fired one after another, sweeping the enemy's bodies. At this moment, human lives were the most worthless thing. However, the Siamese army was already prepared. Although there were soldiers dying in the charge every moment, the charging troops did not have any intention of stopping. They continued to charge in an organized manner. When a group of people died, another group of people would rush up to replace them. Wave after wave of attacks, the Lu 5th Division on the barren hill finally showed signs of being overwhelmed. A few of the Type 95 squad machine guns had to take a short break because the barrels were too hot. The Siamese soldiers took this opportunity to charge up to the foot of the barren hill. Then they strode into the barren hill. Blast them out. Dang Liming shouted to his comrades when he saw the enemy enter his formation. He took out a bayonet from his thigh and attached it to the Type 95. Then he was the first to charge out of the trenches. He wanted to use his actions to tell the enemy that Lung Feng was not only good with guns, he was also good with bayonets. The regiment commander rushed out, and the other soldiers also flashed their bayonets one by one. They followed closely behind and pounced towards the enemy outside the trenches. Every soldier widened their eyes and used all of their strength to deliver a fatal shot to the enemy's chest according to the requirements of the assassination training. Use the grenades as cover. Suppress the enemy's charging momentum. The battalion commander behind Commander Dang Liming shouted as he pulled out a grenade from his waist and threw it forward. Immediately there was a thunderous roar, and the Siamese soldiers roared as they repelled the enemy's attack. At the same time, Dang Liming took the lead and led a group of soldiers to kill the Siamese at the front and reclaim the position that they had lost. The machine guns that had been cooled down by cold water rang out again, suppressing the enemy's approach. This kind of repeated battle for positions happened many times that day. It was not until late at night when it started to drizzle that the Siamese troops stopped attacking. The battlefield became quiet again. Clean up the battlefield, check the injuries and check the weapons and equipment. Xiao Yining, the commander of the Lu 5th Division, patiently walked in the trenches and passed down orders to the soldiers. Sometimes he even reached out to help some of his comrades carry the bodies or bandage the wounds. Yang Chendong led 1,000 Black Knights and sat on the highest point of the barren mountain. From the beginning of the war until now, even when the trenches were about to be taken, they did not make a move. They had been conserving their strength because they knew that there would be more important tasks for them to complete. 6th Young Master, the casualty statistics are out. After a day and a night of fighting, more than 400 soldiers of the 5th Division were killed, more than 1,000 were seriously injured and 5,000 were injured. Xiao Yining said in a sobbing voice. For him, this was the biggest sacrifice he had made since he joined the Battle of the Cold Front. In the face of Xiao Yining's complaints, Yang Chendong did not reprimand nor did he console him. He only replied with 3 simple words, "Got it?" After saying these words, he finally got up slowly and patted the white dragon horse beside him. "Old man, it's time for us to show our power. Are you ready?" Although it was only a war horse, the white dragon seemed to be able to understand Yang Chendong's words. It could not help but raise its neck and neighed. This caused Yang Chendong to laugh out loud. "All right, since you're ready, then let's have a big fight. Brothers, are you ready?" "We're ready." 1,000 Black Knights answered him in unison. Beta Persei was also standing among the Black Knights. After answering this sentence, he carefully took a few steps forward. "6th Master, why don't you not participate in this operation? Anything can happen on the battlefield." Yang Chendong already knew what Beta Persei was going to say. Without waiting for him to speak, he had already said, "There's no need to persuade me. The soldiers can fight with their lives on the line and be fearless. Why can't I? It's settled. We'll attack in 4 groups according to the plan." 1,000 Black Knights were divided into 4 groups. Yang Chendong, Beta Persei, 1st Brigade Leader Qiu Vi, and 2nd Brigade Leader Dao Xiao would each lead a group to attack. This was originally part of the plan. How could they change it at the last minute? Chapter 1032. Beta Persei had followed Yang Qindong for a long time and knew the temperament of the young master well. Most of the time he was easy to talk to and listen to advice. However, once he made a decision, it was not something that could be changed at any time. Knowing that it was useless to persuade him, Beta Persei spoke to Badao Jiang and Peng Yu, who were in Yang Qindong's team. I'll leave the young master's safety to you. If anything happens, I'll kill you. Second brother, don't worry. Even if we die in battle, our souls will protect the 6th young master and bring him back safely. Badao Jiang and Peng Yu said with a solemn expression. 1,000 people were divided into 4 teams, which meant that each team had about 250 people. Due to the rain, the Siamese soldiers had to rest and reorganize. When they stopped attacking, Yang Qindong personally led them to launch a counterattack. Before they set off, Yang Qindong said to Xiao Yining, "Cook immediately and take the time to rest. The soldiers are very tired after fighting for a day and a night. I'm afraid there will be more difficult battles waiting for us. The more energy we have, the more likely we will win. 6th young master, don't worry. We will wait for your triumphant return. Hot meals will be waiting for you and the Black Cavalry." Xiao Yining stood straight and saluted. Definitely. Yang Qindong's face revealed a confident smile. Then he lightly clamped his legs and rode the white dragon horse in the direction of the retreating Siamese soldiers. The battle had been going on for a day and a night. Under the tense atmosphere, the Siamese soldiers were exhausted. Taking advantage of the light rain, they rested for a short while. From their point of view, the 5-star army was small in number and it was almost impossible for them to change the battle. They were tired and needed to rest. Their opponents should take this opportunity to lie down on the ground and rest. It was impossible for them to launch a counterattack and threaten the Siamese soldiers. Under such circumstances, the Siamese soldiers did not even bother to send out their sentries. In the dark night, the soldiers gathered in circles to cook. They enjoyed the warm meal in the rain to replenish the nutrients their bodies lacked. Just when the meal was ready and everyone was about to eat, the sound of galloping horses approached from afar. When the Siamese soldiers at the front heard it, they were all in disbelief. They did not believe that the 5-star army would take the initiative to cause them trouble. What right did they have? Regardless of whether they believed it or not, the cavalry of the 5-star troop was really here. Just as some of the vigilant Siamese soldiers stood up, a group of black figures emerged from the darkness. Under the light of the bonfire, the gleaming silver broadswords slashed at the frightened Siamese soldiers. The Siamese soldiers were unprepared for the sudden attack and suffered a great loss. Most of them were chopped in half and turned into corpses before they could even hold their weapons. A few lucky ones turned around and fled. They led the Black Knights to another camp and repeated the previous attack. Yang Qindong had always been at the front of his team. His physical fitness was already very good. No one could beat him in terms of both strength and toughness. In addition, the White Dragon was the king of horses. With the combination of the two, once he rushed out, no one could catch up to him. Naturally, he took the responsibility of being the tip of the arrow. His appearance was like a golden needle that quickly pierced into a person's body. Wherever he went, the Siamese soldiers, whether armed or unarmed, soldiers or generals, were no match for him. They were all killed with a single slash of his saber and fell to the ground with hatred in their hearts. Quick, keep up with him. Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu pushed their horses to their limits, but they were barely able to keep up with Yang Qindong. This made them extremely anxious, and at the same time they used all of their strength. Every time their silver blade struck down, another soul would appear on the battlefield. Although there were only around 250 people under Yang Qindong's lead, everyone forgot about this fact. All they thought about was constantly moving forward, constantly killing the enemy and constantly killing the enemy. With such high morale, the cavalry of more than 200 men forced their way through 4 Siamese military camps, each of which had at least 1,000 soldiers. However, with the advantage in numbers, they could not fight back. They could only run with their instinct. After charging into the 5th camp, Yang Qindong finally felt a trace of weakness. The speed at which he swung his sword slowed down, allowing Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu, who were behind him, to catch up. Then the two of them shouted, "Sixth young master, we have charged into the 5th camp. We have completed our mission. We can retreat now." It's already the 5th camp? Yang Qindong smiled as he thought about the plan to retreat after charging into 3 enemy camps. Then he shouted, "The enemy is too easy to kill. They are completely defenseless. Let's charge into one more camp. No matter what the situation is, we will retreat. What do you think? Even though Yang Qindong said it in a negotiating tone, his tone was firm. Badao Jiang and Pengyu could not say anything. They could only smile bitterly and follow behind Yang Qindong as they continued to charge forward. 2 hours later, Xiao Yining, the commander of the 5th Infantry Division, stood on a barren hill and looked into the distance. So much time had passed. Why had not a single shadow cavalry unit returned? Did something happen to them? Just as he was worrying, the sound of hooves could be heard from afar. Then the first batch of retreating units appeared. It was the 4th unit led by Dao Xiao. Their bodies reeked of blood, representing their achievements. When they retreated to the barren hill and saw that they were the first batch to retreat, he could not help but be shocked. 6th young master and the rest did not return? No, you are the first unit. Xiao Yining replied honestly. What? That won't do. I have to go and receive them. This result shocked Dao Xiao. He had already completed his mission to kill 3 enemy camps. That was why he had retreated. However, he had not seen a single unit return. This could only mean that they had completed their mission beyond their expectations. He hated himself for being too honest and obedient. He wanted to lead his unit out again. However, Xiao Yining took large strides forward and blocked Dao Xiao's warhorse. No, it is so dark. You might not be able to find them. If every team that returns has to go look for the others, when will that ever end? Listen to my advice. Stay here and observe the situation first before making a decision. Furthermore, the soldiers must be tired and thirsty. Rest and replenish your energy. Even though Xiao Yining was the commander of a division and was leading the Cold Vanguard Division, his position was high. However, in front of the Black Knights in Longwei, he was still extremely courteous. He knew that the other party was only inferior to him in terms of rank. In terms of influence, he would never be able to catch up. These words left Dao Xiao speechless. He thought that he could continue to kill, but the soldiers must be tired. He nodded and said, "All right, then let's grab some food. If there is a change in the situation, we will still have to go out." All right. Hurry up and bring the prepared hot food." Seeing that his advice was effective, Xiao Yining couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief and shouted loudly behind him. Not long after Dao Xiao, the leader of the 3rd unit, Qiu Vi, also returned with his men. He was also reeking of blood. Dao Xiao quickly ran over to ask about the results. When he found out that this unit had not only killed 3 but 4 battalions, he stomped his feet in regret. Not long after Qiu Vi returned, the leader of the 2nd unit, Beta Persei, also returned. He had killed 5 battalions. He thought that it was about time, but when he returned, he realized that the young master had not returned. He did not even want to eat and was about to turn around and rush back. However, he was stopped by Xiao Yining. "Second brother, even if your body is fine, you still have to consider the condition of the soldiers. You came back later than the other 2 units after killing 5 battalions. I'm sure the 6th young master must have killed more than 5 battalions. Why don't you eat something first and wait and see?" That's right, Qiu Wu and Dao Xiao said. The starting point of departure was the same, and the speed of return was determined by the number of enemy battalions killed. In this case, it was very likely that the 6th young master would kill his way into the 6th battalion. In this case, the 6th young master's return should not be far away. All right. Beta Persei looked at the Dark Knight. He was also worried that he would not be able to find the young master if he went out now. He would also put his brothers in danger. Therefore, he decided to wait a little longer. This wait lasted for an hour. Beta Persei, who felt that a day was like a year, forced himself to drink a bowl of meat soup. Finally, he could not wait any longer. No, it's been so long and the young master still hasn't returned. Something must have happened. We can't wait any longer. Yes, we can't wait any longer. This time, even Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao could not sit still. According to the time, even if the 6th young master had killed 6 battalions, he should have returned long ago. However, he still had not returned. Could it be that he had killed more enemies? Or did something happen? When they thought of the latter who could still sit still. First, they were the Black Knights, then the Longwei. They were responsible for ensuring the absolute safety of the 6th young master. In a sense, they were equivalent to the Emperor's personal army. Naturally, they were incomparably prestigious. However, this prestige was based on the fact that Yang Qindong was fine. If something really happened, they would not be able to bear the responsibility even if they all died 10 times over. Xiao Yining did not dare to stop them. After an extra hour, he had already lost his confidence. If it was not for the fact that he did not have a warhorse to ride, he would have asked to go out and fight. Men, each unit take out 200 Type 95 weapons and give them to the Black Cavalry. The only thing Xiao Yining could do was to donate the weapons. No matter what, it would be considered a contribution. Chapter 1033. Wait a minute. Just as Xiao Yining issued the task, Beta Persei, who was already on his horse, raised his middle finger and gestured for silence. Then, on the quiet barren mountain, almost everyone heard the sound of horse hooves stomping on the ground. It was getting closer and closer, becoming clearer and clearer. Young master is back. It must be the young master, Beta Persei couldn't help but cry out, his childlike face full of joy. It was Yang Qindong. At this moment, his golden battle robe had long been dyed blood red. When he saw Beta Persei and the others at the foot of the barren mountain from afar, he squeezed out a smile even though he was a little tired. Haha, everyone must be anxious from waiting. This time I violated the military order, it's my responsibility. Yang Qindong had set an example by apologizing as soon as he arrived. With his status, he had to admit that he had done something wrong. He believed that in the future, other officials, no matter how high their ranks were, would have to have an attitude when they did something wrong. Young master, are you okay? But at this moment, no one took his self-reflection seriously. Everyone was really concerned about whether Yang Qindong's body had any problems and whether he was injured. I'm fine. I just killed a little too ruthlessly. 2 of my brothers were injured, but fortunately I checked on them on the way. It's not fatal. They'll be fine after some rest. Yang Qindong grinned and laughed. This was the strength of the Shadow Cavalry. They were covered in protective armor and so were their war horses. Unless they were trapped and died of exhaustion or stripped of their armor, it would be extremely difficult to kill them. This was also the main reason why Yang Qindong dared to split them into 4 teams to counterattack with only 1,000 Shadow Cavalry. Facts also proved that there were no casualties in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th teams. Some were only injured by the shock. When they heard that Yang Qindong was fine and only 2 of his comrades were slightly injured, everyone laughed. Then Beta Persei couldn't help but ask curiously, "Young master, you came back so late. How many enemy camps did you break through?" Faced with this question that everyone was curious about, Yang Qindong didn't answer. Instead, he dismounted from his white dragon warhorse and went to find something to eat and drink. Yang Qindong didn't want to answer and no one dared to ask. However, Badao Jiang and Peng Yu who were following behind him didn't receive such treatment. Beta Persei and the others quickly surrounded them. In the end, the 2 couldn't stand the interrogation and answered the question. The 6th young master was so focused on killing that he didn't take it seriously even when we reminded him several times. Later, if it wasn't for the fact that the warhorse was carrying too much weight, he probably wouldn't have come back. Badao Jiang said casually, but he still didn't answer the question. For a moment, Beta Persei and the others were angry. They rolled up their sleeves and looked like they were really going to fight. Peng Yu was more reliable. He first smiled and then replied, 8th Battalion. What? 8th Battalion? Hearing this answer, Beta Persei and the others were stunned. Their 3 teams combined had only broken through 12 battalions. The 6th young master's team had broken through 8 battalions. Didn't this mean that he had completed nearly 300% of the mission? And that was the truth. When Yang Qindong saw that the Siamese army was unprepared, he went on a killing spree and broke through battalions one after another. Finally, he reached 8 battalions before returning. With a team of more than 200 people, he had broken through the Siamese army's 8,000 soldiers. Obviously, he had created another miracle. The 5-star army was shocked by Yang Qindong's excitement. Then there were sounds of surprise. The commander of the 5th Division, Xiao Yining, did a rough calculation. The 4 teams together were equivalent to breaking through 20 battalions of the enemy. That was a total of 20,000 soldiers. The Siamese army had suffered such heavy losses and would not be able to recover for a while. So, could his soldiers rest for the night? For this request, Yang Qindong waved his hand and approved it. Take the time to rest. The enemy needs time to prepare. But with such heavy losses, I'm afraid that the attack tomorrow morning will be even fiercer. Rest well for the big battle. Rest well for the big battle. At this moment, all the soldiers of the 5-star army shouted in unison. The morale of the 5-star army was high and the crowd was furious. Tong Si was burning with anger and could not suppress it. When he heard that in just 4 hours they had lost 20 battalions of soldiers, nearly 10,000 dead, countless injured and countless deserters, he could not believe his ears. During the day the 5-star army showed signs of weakness. There were even a few times when his soldiers were at the foot of a barren mountain. Victory was in sight. How could the enemy have the strength to retaliate? General, could it be that the enemy's reinforcements have arrived? You also know that if Yang Qindong is here, the other 5-element armies will definitely rush here like crazy. A deputy general also couldn't figure it out, so he made a guess. *T. I have already arranged countless scouts around the perimeter of the battlefield. Even if there are reinforcements, we should be the first to know. However, there is no news at all. Could it be that their reinforcements didn't come from the ground but from the sky? Tong De shouted angrily. This. The others in the main tent did not say anything. They could not explain this matter. Everything was up to General Tong Si. Tong Si could not figure it out. But his intuition told him that the 5-star army's counterattack was just an arrow at the end of its flight. Otherwise, they would not have stopped at 20 battalions. They would have killed their way to his main tent. In other words, he still had the advantage in numbers. If he wanted to win this battle, he could only continue with this advantage. All of you, go to the battalions immediately and calm the soldiers down. We will launch the attack tomorrow morning. No matter what, we must take Yang Qindong's life this time. Suing City, on top of the city wall. The deputy governor of Cambodia, Din Din Wei, and the Cambodian general, Dagan, were looking towards the southwest. After Yang Qindong left the city, no one dared to attack Suing City. In fact, in order to achieve an absolute advantage in numbers, the Siamese soldiers who were guarding the city were all mobilized. In other words, Suing City was really safe at this moment. Yang Qindong was indeed in danger. The sound of cannons had been heard since the night before. It had been 2 days and 2 nights. Although they were far away and could not see what the 5-star army had been through, the sounds of fighting and killing had not stopped. It was easy to imagine that the 5-star army was not having a good time. Yang Qindong had also been in danger. General Dagan, how many soldiers can we gather in the city? Din Din Wei looked into the distance for a long time and finally could not help but ask. Sai, Deputy Governor, I know what you mean, but we only have about 1,000 soldiers in the city, and half of them are injured. If we rely on them, we can't even defend the city. If we really go out to help, the Siamese soldiers will attack the city at any time. If that's the case, I don't think the 6th young master wants to see. Dagan sighed. As a general, he certainly did not want to watch others fight. But with his current strength, there was nothing he could do. These words extinguished Ding Ding Wei's courage that had just arisen. So, we can only watch? No, didn't the 6th young master say that we have enough soldiers in the city? He wants us to prepare enough troops in the city to clean up the battlefield at any time and snatch the supplies that the enemy will leave behind. This is also a very important task. When Dagan said this, he felt a little lacking in confidence. The Siamese soldiers had mobilized more than 100,000 soldiers and reinforcements were still coming. It would be very difficult for Yang Qindong to escape, let alone defeat the enemy. Din Din Wei could hear the disappointment in Dagan's words. He said confidently, we have to believe in the 6th young master. He is a man who likes to create miracles. Besides, after his arrival, our people's lives have been better than before. Compared to His Majesty Boromir, he is more suitable to lead and lead us, isn't he? Yes, that's right, we need to mobilize now. We need to mobilize the people in the city. We just need to wait for 6th young master to win the battle and capture the captives. This? Dagan originally wanted to ask if this would work. But when he saw how serious Din Din Wei was, he nodded. Then let's go and prepare. 20 miles away from Golden Rim City, a cavalry team was coming. The leader was Major General Tian who usually had a cold face and was serious in speech and manner. After coming ashore from Baji Port, he led the world's #1 cavalry division and traveled day and night without rest. Even when they were eating, they had to eat while riding their horses. Finally, they arrived at Golden Rim City. However, it had been 2 days and 2 nights since the Siamese army besieged the 6th young master. How far is it from here to Suing City? Tian Hu asked Lu Duo, who was beside him as he rode forward. Commander, it is about 400 miles away. Lu Duo had already familiarized himself with the map before coming, so he answered without hesitation. It is still so far away. No, we are still too slow. Hearing that it would take more than a day, Tian Hu shook his head and expressed his dissatisfaction. It is already very fast. After all, we still have a lot of things with us. Lu Duo explained after listening. The world's #1 cavalry division dominated the beginning city and the North Desert region. They were similar to the roaming cavalry. There was no fixed training ground at all. Often they would fight wherever they went. Especially when they encountered unknown cavalry, they would immediately enter the opportunity to train. Therefore, they usually brought a lot of things such as food and water. It should be known that a large part of the grassland was desert. If there was not enough water, it was easy to get hungry and thirsty, leading to a decline in combat strength. Chapter 1034. There was also the quiver. Compared to an ordinary cavalry that only had a quiver with 50 arrows, the soldiers of the world's number 1 cavalry division had 20 quiver with 1,000 arrows. This was because they were used to doing things without supplies, so they had to be self-sufficient. In addition, there were clothes, shoes, hats, bows, extra sabers, and so on. Fortunately, each of them had 2 horses so they could carry such heavy loads. However, this greatly reduced their speed. Now that the 6th young master was in danger, as the closest reinforcements, the number 1 cavalry division in the world had to rush over as quickly as possible. Even if they arrived 30 minutes earlier, they might be able to change many things. Leave 200 people in each division and lead the extra horses slowly. The rest of you should speed up. Other than the necessary weapons and rations, leave everything else behind. Our top priority is to rush over with all our might. Tian Hu took a deep breath and immediately made a decision. Lu Duo only hesitated for a moment before giving a military salute. Then he began to pass down orders to the messenger behind him. Immediately, the 1st Cavalry Division, which originally had 10,000 people, was left with 800 people. At the same time, they also left behind 10,800 war horses and a bunch of supplies. Without any restraints, Tian Hu, who had only brought rations for a day, acted as if he would either succeed or die for a righteous cause. He had already used his actions to tell everyone that they had to rush over to the location to rescue the 6th young master. Otherwise, they would run out of food first. The 9,200 cavalry troops advanced quickly. Everywhere they passed, clouds of smoke and dust would rise, giving people the feeling that they were riding on a cloud of dust. On the barren mountain, because of the sneak attack, they managed to obtain half a night to rest. When the sun rose the next day, the crazy attacks began again. As if considering the factor of long delays, Tong Si once again gave an iron order that they could only advance and not retreat. At the same time, the reward for killing Yang Chendong was increased from 10,000 silver taels to 20,000 silver taels. To an ordinary soldier, this was definitely a heaven-shaking sum. It was equivalent to being able to rise from the poor class to the upper class, and not having to worry about food and water for the rest of their lives. This also greatly increased the morale and enticement of the soldiers. Even though they knew that the 5-star army possessed extremely miraculous and formidable firearms, the soldiers were still as numerous as the clouds in the sky. Often, after a batch of soldiers was shot down, a new batch would appear immediately. From the looks of it, if the soldiers of the late Qing dynasty had such morale, they wouldn't have allowed the 8-nation alliance to invade. Facing such an attack, 5th Master Lu was also undergoing the harshest test. Their ammunition consumption was too fast, and without enough supplies they were already stretched thin. Of course, the most important thing was that the enemy's charge was too fierce. Many of the muskets had to be used continuously, and the chances of them having problems were greatly increased. For example, misfiring, jamming, or overloading of the musket, causing it to not be able to fire, occurred repeatedly. Originally, 5th Master Lu only had 1 musket each and did not have many spare muskets. Thus, he had no choice but to pick up a bayonet and go into battle bare-chested. It must be said that the Lung Feng soldiers were not bad with their muskets, and their close combat abilities were also very strong. Once they were back-to-back and formed a 3x3 formation, the 3 of them could easily kill enemies several times their number. Unfortunately, the number of enemies they faced this time was too much, and it was not just several times their number. After 3 days of battle, the Siamese soldiers had already suffered tens of thousands of casualties, which was a few thousand times the number of casualties of the 5-star army. However, when the muskets could no longer display their advantage, the number of casualties began to decrease. At around 10 in the morning, the firearms started to have problems on a large scale. By the time they switched to close combat at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, a total of 3 hours and 3 hours had passed. The number of casualties in the 5th Army had exceeded 1,000. What was even more frightening was that this number was still increasing. If it wasn't for Yang Chendong bringing the Black Knights and the Dragon Guards to join in and kill the enemy from time to time, the barren mountain might not have been able to be defended. Such a loss had never happened since the establishment of the Lung Feng army. However, no one complained. When they became the glorious soldiers of the Lung Feng army, they were destined to bear the same amount of pressure. For example, in the face of danger, they were expected to face death with equanimity. Use grenades when there are more people and bayonets when there are fewer people. Those who can use muskets, please be prepared to cooperate. Please don't be a hero, don't fight alone, and don't casually save people, 5th Master Lu Division Xiao Yining said as he almost cried. Just now, he didn't know how many heroic soldiers had taken the initiative to charge at the enemy, and then fought one against many hundreds and finally died on the battlefield. He also saw that in order to save these lone heroes, many soldiers had charged into the enemy camp like moths to a flame. After entering, they never came out again. These were all good warriors. Even in the face of death, they did not flinch. He was happy to be their commander, but at the same time he was sad for their sacrifice. However, war was cruel to begin with. Once on the battlefield, one had to be prepared to die on the battlefield. Perhaps this was the fate of some soldiers. However, as a division commander, it was better to have one less person die. It could be said that the Lung Feng army had undergone all kinds of training in the past, including winning with fewer people and bullying with more people. However, they really didn't have much training in using cold weapons to fight with fewer people. Perhaps everyone subconsciously thought that this kind of thing wouldn't happen. Thus, when faced with such a situation, there was some confusion. Division Commander Xiao Yining shouted at the top of his lungs. Under the cooperation of the other commanders, 5th Master Lu Division began to withdraw their forces. At the same time, they also gave up their territory on the outskirts of the barren mountain. Standing on the barren mountain, Yang Qindong didn't stop this from happening. This was because he knew that 5th Master Lu Division wasn't giving up on the battle. Instead, they were welcoming the arrival of a greater victory with a better posture. At 2 in the afternoon, the enemy's large-scale attack began again. From afar, the figures were densely packed. Based on a rough estimate, there were at least 30 to 40,000 soldiers. They relied on their numbers and shouted as they charged forward. In the face of the locust-like enemy, the remaining 6,000 soldiers of the 5th Division were not afraid at all. First, they threw out the last grenades in their hands, forcefully blasting a hole in the enemy's formation. Then they began a frenzied counterattack. With companies as units, they stabbed forward like many sharp knives, forcefully suppressing the enemy's advance. Get on your horses and attack. Seeing this scene, Yang Qindong knew that it was time for him to counterattack. He immediately leaped onto the white dragon horse and rushed out in a blood-red battle robe. Beside him and behind him were 1,000 black knights and dragon guards. They also raised their steel swords and rushed towards the enemy while shouting and yelling. Facing the densely packed enemy, the cavalry's charging force was limited. If they were caught in the crossfire, they would become the target of public criticism. There would be no possibility of retreat or even survival. But at this moment, no one showed any intention of retreating. To be a member of the Black Cavalry, one had to be extremely loyal. They usually enjoyed the respect of others, and now, it was time for them to pay the same price. 1,000 Black Cavalry Dragon Guards charged into the enemy's camp. First, they killed their way into the enemy's camp. Then they were scattered and surrounded. Finally, their armor was riddled with holes. The so-called invulnerable black armor had served its purpose. It could no longer protect the Black Cavalry Dragon Guards, and they became the targets of the Siamese soldiers. The sun gradually set in the west and the sky finally turned dark again. Translator. Nioibo Studio Editor. Nioibo Studio. The arrival of night hindered the Siamese army's attack. Yang Qindong and his men could finally take a breather. When they returned to the barren hills and were panting, new casualties were reported. 5th Master Lu Division had less than 4,000 soldiers left. Even the Black Cavalry had less than 800 men left. Even the Black Cavalry had lost more than 200 men. This showed the cruelty of the battle. Their deaths will not be in vain. Their deaths laid the foundation for our greater victory. Their deaths were worthy and honorable. Yang Qindong said and did so at the same time. He requested for a list of all the soldiers who died in the battle to be given to him. All of them would be treated as martyrs so that their families and loved ones would be taken care of. To paraphrase Yang Qindong's words, we cannot let the heroes bleed and shed tears. We cannot let their souls not rest in peace. We must let them pass away peacefully without any worries or scruples. Long live the 6th young master. More than 4,000 soldiers knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Yang Qindong, to the god in their hearts. Morale was still high. Many soldiers showed an attitude of facing death as they waited for the next bloody battle to come. At that time they might fall and never get up again. But they had nothing to regret. This was their fate. There was nothing to worry about because everything had been arranged for them by the 6th young master. The soldiers were not afraid of death, but some were afraid of Yang Qindong's death. Xiao Yining and Beta Persei walked up to Yang Qindong together and made a request with a serious expression. In the next battle they would try their best to charge and kill their way out of the encirclement. Break out? That's impossible. After understanding the meaning of the two, Yang Qindong shook his head with a bitter smile. If he knew that Yang Qindong would have such an attitude, Xiao Yining would not have cared about his status and said firmly, "Sixth young master, we are not asking for your opinion. We are informing you of this decision. Are you going to force me out?" Yang Qindong saw that Xiao Yining was serious, so he pretended to be angry and his face darkened. Chapter 1035. Don't blame Commander Xiao, this is also the opinion of all of us in Long Wei. Our duty is to protect your absolute safety. Now that there is danger, the young master must leave. There is no room for discussion. Beta Persei spoke up. He who had always followed Yang Qindong's lead, finally became the bad guy for once and offered his opinion. Since Beta Persei had made such a statement, Yang Qindong knew that it would be difficult to refuse. A thought came to his mind and he asked, "Since we are breaking out of the encirclement, where should we go? Now that Wang Shan is also injured and the radio is damaged, we don't know where our troops are and where the danger is. Once we rush out, what should we do if we get surrounded again? At that time, our reinforcements won't even know where we are. What should they do then? Won't it be even more dangerous?" When the battle was at its cruelest, the telegrapher Wang Shan also joined the battle. However, because his strength was limited, he was killed and carried back. Not only that, but the radio was also damaged and could not be used for a while. Yang Qindong could naturally solve all of this. For example, he could take out another radio from the warehouse and then send a report to the outside to inquire about the situation. However, he did not do so. He also wanted to see what the other armies would choose to do when they did not hear from him. This was often the best time to test people's hearts. He did not expect that this method of testing others would become an excuse. It was an excellent excuse to not be forced to break out of the encirclement. Beta Persei and Xiao Yining only thought about how to ensure Yang Qindong's safety and did not think about what to do after they got out. Now that they were asked this question, they did not know what to say. However, Yang Qindong still had a relaxed smile on his face and said, "Well, you have to believe in yourselves and our army. I promise that as long as we can hold on, the reinforcements will arrive by tomorrow at the latest. At that time, it will be time for us to fight back with all our strength." "The reinforcements will arrive tomorrow?" Beta Persei and Xiao Yining looked shocked. At the same time, they also had a question to ask. How did Yang Qindong find out about the radio station without it? However, they wouldn't say anything like that, nor did they dare to say anything. "Yes, the reinforcements will arrive tomorrow," Yang Qindong said as if there was something important. Of course, he wouldn't say that he was just guessing. In fact, he didn't know where the reinforcements were. Everything was just a guess. He just wanted to cheer everyone up so that they wouldn't lose hope. If the reinforcements did not arrive the next day, that would be easy too. They could just push it back by one day. After all, the effect of the pep talk would take effect. Others did not know that this was all a guess. Looking at Yang Qindong's confident demeanor, Beta Persei and Xiao Yining retreated with joy. Then the news that reinforcements would arrive after a day of defending spread, and morale rose again. Tong Si did not know when the reinforcements from the 5-star army would arrive. However, he had a feeling that they were not far away. It had been more than 10 days since the attack on Suwing City and the Barren Mountain. The 5-star army should have made their move by now. If he couldn't take down Yang Qindong, he was afraid that he would lose this great opportunity. Not only that, he might fall into a passive position. The number of 5-star army in the Barren Mountain had been determined. There were less than 10,000 people. However, he had led hundreds of thousands of troops to fight for many days. So far, the number of dead and injured had reached 70 to 80,000, but they still hadn't been taken down. A 5-star army of nearly 10,000 people was already so powerful. What if another one came? He didn't dare to think about what the consequences would be. Pass down the order. Have a good rest tonight and attack with all your strength tomorrow morning. No matter what, we must take down Yang Qindong. Also, all the battalions must be prepared for a sneak attack. Once the enemy comes, they won't be able to return. Tong Si didn't choose to attack at night. He was worried that once the 5-star army broke through in the dark, their vision would be affected. In order to not let Yang Qindong escape, he had to make the decision to let the enemy rest for another night. Yang Qindong, who was at the foot of the Barren Mountain, didn't know that the Siamese soldiers wouldn't attack tonight. Late into the night, there was still no movement from the enemy. Yang Chendong finally said, "Did you see that? The enemy has already expected us to break through, so they didn't choose to attack at night. Okay, now everyone can have a good rest." Beta Persei and Xiao Yining both had bitter expressions. They knew that if they broke through during the day, the danger would be greater. After all, the barren mountain had been completely surrounded. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that not even a bird could fly out. Even so, they could only place their hopes on the reinforcements that would arrive tomorrow. Will there really be reinforcements? Who will they be? This question appeared in the hearts of many people, but no one asked because it was tantamount to questioning the sixth young master's words. This was a political issue. Yang Chendong leaned against a boulder and slept for the night. In his dream he saw his wives and little Lele. He saw little Lele happily hugging his neck and kissing him on the cheek. He also saw First Madame Hu Yen, who was already pregnant. When he carefully leaned his head over, he first heard the faint sound of the baby breathing. Then it became louder and louder until it became a very loud dong 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 trembling sound. It seemed that at this moment the earth was trembling with it. Young master, young master." While he was in a daze, Beta Persei's voice suddenly sounded and then his body shook. Yang Chendong instinctively opened his eyes, and Beta Persei's wide-eyed face appeared in his line of sight. Seeing that Yang Chendong had woken up, Beta Persei said happily, "Young master, you're really amazing. The reinforcements are here, the reinforcements are here." The reinforcements are here? Yang Chendong was also shocked by this news, and when he wanted to say something, the sound of armored horses trampling on the ground entered his ears. He finally knew where the sound in his dream came from. It was precisely because of this that Yang Chendong's eyes widened. "How many reinforcements are here? Which team is it?" "I don't know yet and I can't see clearly, but it should be the reinforcements." "Young master, look, the Siamese army that was about to attack has become chaotic." Beta Persei pointed to the distance at the foot of the barren mountain and said reasonably, "Binoculars." Yang Chendong said as he took the binoculars from Chiu Vi, the captain of the First Guard Company, and looked at them. "Haha, the reinforcements are here and they seem to be very strong. In this case, immediately inform the entire army to prepare for a full counterattack. We need to attack from the center and attack from both sides." Looking through the binoculars, Yang Chendong saw the commotion in the enemy camp, and at this moment he was extremely excited. He did not think that the Siamese army still needed to put on such a show at this time. Faced with only half the number of people, and his condition was not very good, they could attack with just a burst of energy. It was meaningless to put on such a show now. In fact, the reinforcements were indeed here, and it was the 1st Cavalry Division that had arrived. After removing all the burden, Tian, who led the main force of the 1st Cavalry Division, 9,200 people, and traveled more than 400 miles in one day and one night, arriving at the barren mountain outside Suwing City. Seeing that the sky was about to brighten, Tian, who gave everyone an hour to rest, and then said to the 5 regimental commanders, "If there are no major changes, the 6th young master is on the barren mountain in the distance. This battle will be the time for the 1st Cavalry Division to show the strongest combat power. I hope everyone can do their best because all the 5-star army is watching us, because the 6th young master is on the barren mountain watching us. Is everyone confident?" It was only one day and one night of continuous travel. This was not the first time for the 1st Cavalry Division under the heavens. There was even a time when they traveled continuously for more than 3 days and 3 nights, but when faced with an enemy they still did not rest and won in a spurt of energy. This time they were going to help the 6th young master, so there was no possibility of them backing down. It was mentioned before that the first 3 regimental commanders of the 1st Cavalry Division were all captives. To be able to hold such a high position, it was all because of Yang Chendong's magnanimity. Even if it was to repay his kindness, everyone had to perform well this time. In other words, even without Tian Hu's words, they would still do their best to perform. There are too many enemies, don't split up. Later, all of you will gather in a fan-shaped charge. At the same time, pay close attention to the position of the enemy's commander. If you find anything, immediately notify us. Tian Hu knew the principle of capturing the leader first to capture the bandits. Yes. The 5 regimental commanders agreed without hesitation. Then they turned around to notify the other regimental commanders, and at the same time replenished their food supplies. At this moment all the food they brought was swallowed. They knew very well that they did not know when the next battle would end, and they did not know when their next meal would be. Now they were all prepared to not return until they won. Half an hour later, the 9,200 cavalrymen were ready to charge. Under the command of their division commander, Tian Hu, they suddenly appeared and charged diagonally into the battlefield, charging towards the unprepared Siamese infantry. In history there was a saying that the Jurchens were invincible. However, when they faced the 1st Cavalry Division, when they appeared and launched a frenzied attack, the Siamese soldiers were stunned by the cavalry that appeared out of nowhere. In the past few days, the number of 5-star army soldiers on the barren hills had decreased, but they had also paid a heavy price for it. In the face of the most advanced continuous fire rifles, the others were afraid that they wouldn't be able to avoid them. However, under General Tong's orders and the threat of the inspectors, they had no choice but to use their bodies to block the bullet holes. This made them very puzzled and angry. Now that the 5-star army cavalry had appeared behind them, the first thing they charged at was the inspector brigade, which gave them hope of escaping. Chapter 1036. Although the reward was high, one had to be alive to claim it. After witnessing the power of the 5-star army, the desire to claim the reward faded. It was only because they had no other choice but to make this choice. Now that they had a chance to save their lives, the Siamese soldiers, who were already demoralized, turned their swords around and ran away. Yes, they ran. Faced with the sudden appearance of the world's number 1 cavalry division, most of the Siamese soldiers did not even have the courage to fight. They only knew that the only way to survive had been opened. All they needed to do now was to follow the flow and escape with their lives. With such a mindset and such a general trend, the number 1 cavalry division in the world didn't encounter any resistance at all. There were even many places where the enemy retreated like the tide before they even arrived. The speed at which these people fled was actually not much slower than their war horses. What should we do? The 4th Regiment commander, Bai Shuang, was riding beside Tian Hu. How about this, Regiment Commander Bai? You lead your men to the barren mountains and report our plan to the 6th young master. I will lead the others to continue the pursuit and try to kill the enemy's general. Tian Hu hesitated for a moment before he spoke. Okay, I will do it now. 4th Regiment, come with me. Bai Shuang nodded and left with the order. Leaving Tian Hu behind, Bai Shuang led the rest of the cavalry and continued to charge forward. During the process they kept waving their swords and killing the enemy. Blood and broken limbs were scattered all over the place. On the barren mountain, Bai Shuang arrived with 1,900 cavalrymen. From afar he saw Yang Qindong riding on a white dragon, waiting for the battle. Immediately he leaped off his horse and ran a few steps towards Yang Qindong. Student Bai Shuang is late. Sorry for startling you. Bai Shuang was once a student of Yang Qindong's academy. He was not personally taught by Yang Qindong, so he could not be called a teacher. However, it was not wrong to call him Dean. Haha, it's Regiment Commander Bai. Has the world's 1st Division arrived? After seeing White Shuang, the last trace of suspicion that the Siamese soldiers were putting on an act disappeared. The world's 1st Cavalry Division would never cooperate with the enemy to put on a show. Headmaster, Teacher Tian is leading the main force of the army to kill the enemy. He has sent a student to protect the headmaster. Bai Shuang's voice rang out again. Good, you guys are very good. I'm very pleased that you're fast enough. However, you've already killed your way out, so how can I just watch from the sidelines? Men, follow the young master and charge out. Beta Persei, fire the red signal flare. It's time to inform Ding Ding Wei and General De En Ha. Finally, the reinforcements had arrived. Now it was time for him to shed his blood. At this moment, Yang Qindong felt his entire body brimming with energy. A red signal flare immediately rose into the air, causing Ding Ding Wei and De En, who were waiting for news on the tower, to see it. Immediately, the 20,000 corpse-collecting soldiers in the city opened the city gate and rushed toward the battlefield. At the same time, on top of the barren hill, except for the 500 who were too seriously injured to move, more than 4,000 people rushed out and cooperated with Commander Bai Shuang. This group of more than 6,000 people headed towards the Siamese camp from another direction. In the main tent of the Siamese army, Tong Si was still anxiously waiting for the arrival of good news. However, what he received was not news of the barren mountain being conquered or Yang Qindong being captured. Instead, he received news of the arrival of the 5-star army's reinforcements. As soon as they appeared, they defeated the main force of the Siamese army and were now heading toward the main tent. What's going on? What's going on? How can the reinforcements of the 5-star army arrive so quickly? Tong Si shouted hysterically. At this moment, it was obvious that he did not want to believe that all of this was true. However, the truth was the truth. It would not be false just because one did not want to believe it. After a few captains rushed into the main tent to report the battle situation, Tong Si finally knew that this time they had really lost. Not only did he lose the opportunity to capture Yang Qindong, but it was also very likely that he would be defeated because of this. If he had escaped a little slower, his life would have been in danger. Retreat. In desperation, Tong Si had no choice but to issue such a military order. What Tong Si did not know was that the generals below him were already afraid of the five-star army. According to them, the five-star army's reinforcements numbered in the tens of thousands. Therefore, it was impossible for them to defeat them. Otherwise, with Tong Si's 60,000 soldiers, it was completely possible for him to compete with the 1st Cavalry Division. Once an army lost its fighting spirit, it was no better than an organized group of civilians. When the order to retreat was given, the camp immediately became chaotic. Everyone fought to leave, and all the generals asked the ration officer for food. Food had to be eaten mouthful by mouthful, roads had to be taken step by step, and tasks had to be done one by one. When faced with so many generals asking for food, the ration officer was confused. When he strongly urged everyone to line up and distribute the food, saying that it would take at least 1 to 3 days to complete, the generals could not accept it. Some of them even started to fight for the food. Before they met the enemy, the Siamese army was already in a mess. It was a pity that Tong Si had already retreated, so he didn't have the ability to distribute or preside over the overall situation. When the 1st Heavenly Cavalry Division arrived at the main camp, all they saw was a mountain of rations that had yet to be distributed. Leave 200 men to guard the granary. The rest of you follow me to kill the enemy. After unexpectedly obtaining these rations, Tian Hu didn't show much joy on his face. His target was the enemy's commander, Tong Si. As long as he captured this person, this battle would be considered complete in his eyes. The 1st Cavalry Division continued their pursuit. Along the way, all the enemies they encountered surrendered. Very few people had the courage to fight. As a result, the entire battlefield was filled with scenes of the Siamese soldiers surrendering. Fortunately, Ding Ding Wei and De En arrived quickly and took over the job, preventing the situation from becoming even more chaotic. From this point alone, it was clear that Yang Qindong had foresight. It seemed that he had expected this scene a few days ago. While Tian Hu was advancing bravely, Yang Qindong arrived at the battlefield with more than 6,000 soldiers. Without the supervision of the Inspector Brigade, the Siamese soldiers who had been charging ferociously were now in a state of disarray. They were no longer as brave as before. Instead, they knelt down and threw down their weapons to surrender. Faced with these people who were no longer resisting, Yang Qindong did not give the order to kill them. Instead, he put away their weapons and sent people to watch over them. This was a job that could allow him to take in many captives. This greatly slowed down his progress and caused him to lose sight of Tong Si's fleeing figure. The 1st Cavalry Division also encountered the same problem. There were too many Siamese soldiers surrendering along the way. If these people were not controlled, who knew if they would escape back to Siam and become soldiers again? Commander, what should we do? 1st Regiment Commander Taimu looked at the ground full of captives and asked worriedly. Stop the pursuit and clean up the battlefield. Although he was hesitant, Tian Hu finally gave the order. He could not ignore the tens of thousands of captives in front of him. If these people caused any disasters, he would become a sinner. Tong Si never expected that the ferocious 5-star army would have to give up the pursuit due to the large number of captives. This allowed him to successfully escape from Cambodia and return to Siam. It was said that along the way he encountered nearly 100,000 Siamese soldiers who rushed to reinforce him. They were all persuaded to return. Tong escaped, but even more soldiers were forced to surrender because they didn't have war horses. In order to preserve their lives, they were forced to surrender. According to the statistics after the battle, there were more than 50,000 captives in this battle. There were also countless military supplies and provisions. The battle to defend Suwon City and the danger of being surrounded by barren hills was finally resolved. It seemed like they had effectively blocked the attack of the Siamese army and the 5-star army had turned the tables. However, in Yang Qindong's view, this was far from the end. This was just the beginning. In front of the city gates of Suwon City, there were corpses covered in white cloth. A total of 4,854 soldiers of the 5th Division and the Black Knights had died. At this moment they were all lying here. Many of them could not be found for various reasons. The only things that were covered were the items they used daily. Revenge, revenge, revenge. The entire city gate was filled with shouts. They were all soldiers of the 5th Division. This time they had lost half of their division and were almost crippled. Everyone was suppressing the anger in their hearts. There were less than 800 Black Knights and Dragon Guards left. They stood to the left and right of Yang Qindong. None of them made a sound, but from their eyes, which revealed their armor, they were filled with intense killing intent. It was obvious that they were also extremely sad at this moment. Good, then we will take revenge. Men, bring the prisoners here. Yang Qindong said in accordance with the soldier's voice. After the order was given, 4,854 Siamese soldiers walked out under the escort of the 1st Cavalry Division. These people were all prisoners of war, and they were the kind that did not admit defeat. Even in the prison camp, they were still shouting about their identity as Siamese soldiers. They were still shouting that one day when they returned to the army, they would come back to Cambodia and teach the 5-star army a lesson. Yang Qindong didn't have time to do their ideological work. He didn't even mention the matter of re-education through labor. It just so happened that a large memorial service was going to be held for the dead comrades. These people were put to use. They were tied up with ropes one by one and brought out like sugar-coated haws. There were nearly 50,000 Siamese prisoners outside the city. There were hundreds of thousands of people in Suwon City who watched this scene. They watched as the 4,854 prisoners of war were brought out. They watched as Beta Persei used his naturally loud voice to recite the names of the dead comrades. Chapter 1037. There were nearly 5,000 names, and it would take some time to recite all of them. Even though Yang Er's speed was not slow, it still took him 4 hours. During this time, there was no other sound outside the city except for the sound of the wind. Everyone was listening attentively, as if every name that was called out was imprinted in their hearts. When the last name was read out in front of everyone, Yang Qindong raised his right hand and said loudly, "Invading without a reason, a life for a life. Today these people are sentenced to death and will be executed immediately. Guards, kill. Kill." More than 4,000 soldiers of the 5th Division shouted in unison. Kill. Nearly 800 Black Cavalry soldiers shouted in unison. Kill. 10,000 soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division shouted in unison. Kill. More than 200,000 people on the city gate tower shouted in unison. The sound of killing shook the heavens, and nearly 50,000 Siamese prisoners trembled in fear. Some of the more timid ones could no longer stand and fell to the ground. Under the sound of killing, 454 Siamese soldiers were executed. Their mouths were gagged in advance, so when they died they did not make a single sound. No one knew if they had admitted their mistake at this moment, or if they wanted to continue cursing. But these were no longer important. What was important was that they were dead and could no longer pose any threat to the 5-star army. Since ancient times, many people had said that killing prisoners of war was an ominous thing. But this time, when Yang Qindong ordered the prisoners to be killed, no one made a different sound. Firstly, they were not prisoners at all. They were just enemies who had temporarily lost their ability to fight. Secondly, the souls of the 5th Division, especially the Black Cavalry, had to be avenged. These people should have died on the battlefield long ago. It was not a bad thing to make use of them. The machete fell and 4,054 heads fell to the ground. Nearly 50,000 Siamese prisoners had completely lost their will to fight. At this moment they suddenly understood how precious life was and how lucky they were. With the deaths of these people, the 5-star army became even more famous. Everyone saw the attitude of the 5-star army towards the dead. It was said that not only the direct troops of the 5-star army, but also the Cambodian soldiers who died in the battle and the civilians of Suwon City who participated in the resistance against the enemy received a handsome pension. It was said that Bugnam of Gojoseon had promised that the families of these martyrs would be given jobs. In other words, he was not only responsible for the dead but also for the living. As soon as the news came out, the number of people who signed up to join the army in Cambodia increased by several times. Many young men were still complaining that the appearance of the 5-star army had broken the peace of their lives. However, when they saw the attitude of Yang Qindong towards the civilians of Suwon City, their mentality changed. They realized that Bugnam of Gojoseon really treated them as his own people. He was really working hard for them to have a better life in the future. On top of this, there was only one more condition, which was to respect the Han people. So what? When did ordinary people have the final say? When did they ever enjoy real freedom? There was only one more Han Chinese above them. As long as they acknowledged this point, they would be able to live a better life and obtain more freedom. So why not? No one liked being born inferior. However, when the general trend was like this, there was nothing they could do to change it. In such an environment, being a soldier to defend the country could give them a new hope. They even had the opportunity to raise their status and bring glory to their ancestors. So, what reason did they have not to do it? In fact, as early as the moment the Phnom Penh dynasty became the province of Cambodia, some policies about Yang Xia had been spread. However, most people did not believe it. Today, Yang Qindong used facts to teach everyone a lesson. This kind of doubtful thoughts finally disappeared, allowing more people to see the difference between the five-star army and making more people envious. There were also more people who launched practical actions and began to sign up for enlistment. Ding Ding Wei and De En told the good news to Yang Qindong. Then they looked forward to it. They were happy about the change in the people's views. Although they were former officials of the Phnom Penh dynasty, they could still see who treated the people better. Yang Qindong really wanted to let the people under his rule live a happier life. With this, they should support him. The reason why they looked forward to it was because they were worried that Yang Qindong would not allow these ambitious young people to join the army. After all, the five-star army paid attention to the elite route. It had always been the quality of the soldiers rather than the quantity. It was also possible to refuse these people to join the army. However, this would greatly reduce their enthusiasm, which would increase the difficulty of managing them in the future. Under their expectant gazes, Yang Qindong pondered for a moment before giving his answer. Since they are so hot-blooded, how can we hurt their hearts? Then let's arrange for an assessment. If the conditions permit, and if there are no problems with identity and background, they can join the army. Yang Qindong actually agreed, which naturally made Ding Ding Wei and De En happy. But then there was another problem. De En quickly said, "Sixth young master, this time there are many people who signed up for the army. Not only Suwing City, but many young people of the right age in many towns nearby. If they pass the assessment and political review, can they all join the army?" Of course. Yang Qindong did not understand what De En meant. On the other hand, Ding Ding Wei quickly said, "Sixth young master, it's like this. This time there are a lot of people and there should be a lot of people who pass the assessment. If they all join the army, then the military strength of Cambodia will naturally increase by several times, so the financial pressure will naturally be great. It doesn't matter. As long as they are physically qualified and willing, we can accept them. But we have to explain to them in advance that Cambodia alone does not need so many soldiers. They will have a new place to go in the future. As long as we are prepared, we can accept as many as we want." In this battle, Yang Qindong saw the drawbacks of insufficient military strength. Although he had this feeling before, with the elite route, even if the enemy had a large number of soldiers, what could they do? They would still be defeated by him. But this time, in the face of the sudden attack of the Siamese army, the lack of military strength was finally revealed. Yang Qindong finally understood that sometimes, it was not enough to have a good number of soldiers. It was the truth that ants could kill an elephant. A small country like Siam gave him so much pressure. If he wanted to conquer the West in the future and occupy a larger area of land, how could he do it without enough military strength? If that was the case, he would just recruit soldiers. Other forces could support so many soldiers, so how could Yang Xia not be able to do it? Out of consideration for the future, Yang Qindong agreed to the expansion of the military. Not only that, but he also sent a message to several other provinces. He knew very well that it wouldn't take long for the news of Cambodia province's recruitment to spread out. By then, the men from other provinces would inevitably ask for such a request. Instead of waiting for them to ask for instructions, it was better to just let it go. He wanted to see how many soldiers he could gather with his forces. Just like that, the matter of conscription was settled. As usual, he only sent a telegram to the Crimson City Lord Manor and the military to state the facts. This clearly showed his attitude. "I'm only informing you, not asking for your opinion. Just do as you're told." The recruitment was handed over to Ding Ding Wei and Dagan, who were familiar with the local environment. In Suwing City, Yang Qindong received Lu Zhua, the commander of the new 1st Cavalry Division, who had just arrived. Yang Qindong did not have to be polite to this old subordinate. After learning that Lu Zhua's condition was stable and there were no symptoms of acclimatization, he said, "Since there is no problem with the army, then go and prepare. We will set off in 2 days. It is time to seek justice from Siam." The king of Siam was in Bangkok. General Tong had already fled in defeat. However, he had already lost his freedom the moment he entered the royal capital. He was captured by the king's guards who had been waiting here for a long time and locked up in prison. This time Siam King Ili Chi believed Tong's words. He sent an army to reinforce the eastern front. He even sent out the few cannons he had. However, in the end he did not manage to capture Yang Qindong, but the news of the army's defeat. Since the matter had failed, someone had to take responsibility for it. Tong naturally became the culprit. For this matter, Yi Liqui found Prime Minister Hammond and personally announced his decision to behead Tong Si. According to him, if a general lost a battle, he had to be punished, especially when the five-star army's counterattack was imminent. If he did not deal with Tong, the other generals would not do their best. In the end, they would lose the battle and flee back to the capital. Hamad had a different view on the king's order. From his point of view, when the two armies were at war, it was not auspicious to kill one's general. It would only disappoint the other generals. But since it was the king's order, he had to obey. Therefore, he arranged for someone to go to the dungeon and announce that Tong would be locked up and executed after the battle. From his point of view, since it had to be done, it was best to delay it as much as possible and not let the bad news spread. Tong, who was only one step away from success, was locked up in the dungeon and waiting to be executed after the battle. If he had known this would happen, it would be hard to say if he would have escaped back to the royal city. What Tong didn't expect was that even though he was about to die, the five-star army didn't let him off. He fainted after consuming a meal, and when he opened his eyes, he was already out of the dungeon. He couldn't believe that someone would spend a huge sum of money to buy him out of the dungeon. Chapter 1038. The person said that he was General Tong's family, and they were willing to exchange him for someone of similar stature. He was just a dying man. When the prison guard saw the large amount of gold and silver, he handed him over without much thought. After all, he was going to die anyway, so no one would pay attention to him. However, they did not know that this was the beginning of the disaster for Siam. Everything started with Yang Qindong's telegram reprimanding the intelligence department. The Siamese army split into two groups and marched towards Cambodia to intimidate Laos. The five-star army actually didn't notice such an important military intelligence. It was no wonder that Yang Qindong scolded Yang San in the telegram for being useless. If he couldn't do it, then he should find someone capable to do it. Feeling Yang Qindong's anger, Yang San sent a secret telegram to Golden Rooster, who was in charge of the situation in Southeast Asia. However, this telegram was like a stone thrown into the sea. Helplessly, they had to send someone to investigate. Finally, they received news that Wu Gue, who was temporarily in charge of Sky Sparrow, had been captured by the Siamese army. He was nicknamed Golden Rooster, and his real name was Wu Gue. Just like the Great Ming Dynasty had the Genie Guards and the East Faction Guards, and the Five-Star Army had the Ministry of State Security and the CIA, Siam also had its own intelligence organization, and they had found Wu Gui's location in advance. It was in an inconspicuous courtyard in Bangkok. Siam beat them at their own game. They did not take him down immediately. Instead, under the instructions of Prime Minister Hamad, they only watched him and did not alert the enemy. When the Siam army was preparing for war, Wu Gue, nicknamed Golden Rooster, was gathering his subordinates for a meeting. The Siam army broke in and captured him. They killed 7 members of the intelligence department on the spot, including Golden Rooster. Because the matter was done secretly, and the key members of the intelligence department who knew about Golden Rooster's whereabouts were either dead or captured, the security department did not know about this at all. It was not until Yang Qindong's telegram that they could not contact him that they sent someone to investigate. Only then did they know everything. The intelligence network of the Ministry of State Security in Siam was wiped out. When the news reached Chichen City, 5th Madame Su Maner, who was in charge of the CIA, felt that her opportunity had arrived. Since the establishment of the CIA, although it had done some things, its contributions were not very great. The reason was that the intelligence network of the Security Bureau had been established long ago. At this time, it was not easy for the CIA to insert a rod into it. Not only did they have to face the obstruction of enemy intelligence departments, but they also had to be suppressed by the Ministry of State Security. That's right, it was true that Su Maner was Yang Qindong's 5th madam, but Yang San was a servant who had followed Yang Qindong for many years. He was extremely trusted and valued. When it came to intelligence, he was naturally unwilling to give in. For the sake of the 5th madam, he had already shown enough respect by not directly suppressing the CIA. It was very difficult for the CIA, which was established late and had lost the initiative, to gain any achievements. As the person behind the scenes, Su Maner had been looking for an opportunity to make a breakthrough. Finally, the opportunity had come. The incident in Siam made her feel that there was an opportunity to take advantage of. Immediately, she sent out a very clean female intelligence member, nicknamed Chingtsi, to secretly go to the capital of Siam. According to Su Munair's intention, Qingxi's arrival was to investigate more of the Siam army's movements, as well as whether or not she could analyze their next move. After Qingxi arrived, she learned that General Tong had returned to the capital through buying information with a large sum of money. As such, she immediately bribed someone to be a spy in the prison, wanting to keep an eye on this General Tong. Qingxi had a feeling that the sixth young master would not spare this person. Then, his every move had to be carefully monitored. What she did not expect was that the king of Siam was so decisive and actually gave the order to execute him after the war. Since there was no chance to kill this person on the battlefield, Qingxi had the idea that she could not let him go. Thus, she spent a large sum of money to exchange him in the name of Tong's family. After taking down Tong in this way, Qingxi reported the matter. In her opinion, it was just a trivial matter. However, she did not expect that this telegram would be sent to Yang Qindong. The original intention was for Su Munair to ask how she wanted to punish the culprit. In Yang Qindong's eyes, his eyes could not help but light up. You must hide him well. If it is not safe, kill him on the spot. In short, do not leave any traces behind. Try your best to deny this matter to the outside world. I have great use for it. After sending this telegram, Yang Qindong immediately sent another telegram to Luo Pe, the commander of the Second Army, who had already made preparations to send out troops in Wanxiang City. He allowed him to send out troops to Siam and reminded him that all logistical matters could be handled by the governor of Lao Province, Luan Shaoqian. After sending out these two telegrams, Yang Qindong's third telegram was also sent out. It was sent to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Chichin City, Ma Dali. He requested to send people to Siam as soon as possible to negotiate. After sending out the telegram, Yang Qindong waved his hand and sent out troops to Siam. He had the 1st Cavalry Division, the 1st Cavalry Division of the new army, half of the 5th Division of the Lu Army, and a total of 50,000 Cambodian soldiers, temporarily recruited. In total, he had more than 70,000 people. It was quite a powerful force. Next, it was time for him to seek justice. Wanxiang City. After receiving the telegram, the commander of the Second Army, Luo Pe, took the initiative to look for Luan Shaoqian and Long Tainan. He said that he would immediately send out troops according to the 6th young master's orders and ask them to help and cooperate with him. Whether it was Luan Shaoqian or Long Tainan, they were both relatives of Yang Qindong. In addition, one of them was the leader of Laos, while the other was in charge of the stability of the public security under Yang Qindong's influence. Both of them were very powerful. Even though Luo Pe was already a major general, he still showed a lot of respect when he saw them. Commander Luo, don't worry. Lao Province will definitely listen to the orders of the 6th young master. We will fully support you. If you want money, we will give you money. If you want things, we will give you things. This was Luan Shaoqian's declaration. Then came Long Tianan's voice. Commander Luo, don't worry. I have already discussed with General He Guang. We will try our best to keep up with your pace. During this period, we have recruited a total of 40,000 soldiers. We will fully support you. After more than 10 days, while the situation in Suwing City was worrying, Luan Shaoqian and Long Tainan did not stay idle. After they reached a common goal, they did something very bold without being able to contact Yang Qindong. That was to recruit soldiers on the spot, especially the police force. Under Long Tianan's request, many people joined the army and became members of the Lao army. This allowed the army to expand in a short period of time and reached a total of 40,000 people. It was also proven that their thoughts were the same as Yang Qindong's. As expected, Cambodia province started to expand the army. However, Lao province's actions were done before this order. Because of this, Luan Shaoqian and Long Tainan jointly signed a telegram to Yang Qindong to ask for forgiveness. Not only was military power important, it was also very sensitive. It was like a double-edged sword. If used well, it could be used to kill the enemy. If not, it would hurt oneself. Knowing this, the two of them had to show some attitude. Of course, Yang Qindong also had to show some attitude. He ended the telegram by telling them not to do it again. This was also a reminder to some people that privately recruiting and dispatching troops was not allowed. This warning was a warning that it would not happen again. After receiving support, Commander Luo Pe finally let loose. Other than the 7th Division who remained in Vietnam to stabilize the situation, the 2nd Division and the 6th Division moved out. They suddenly left Wanxiang City and charged towards the Siamese camp outside the city. Following behind these two divisions were the 40,000 newly recruited Lao army soldiers. They were made up of young and strong Lao Lao army soldiers who had yet to get used to each other. At this point, the North, South and East five-star armies started to retaliate against Siam. On the north was the 2nd and 6th divisions led by Luo Pu, as well as the 40,000 Lao soldiers, a total of 67,000 men. On the east was the 1st Cavalry Division led by Yang Qindong, the 1st Cavalry Division of the new 1st Army, half of the 5th Division and 50,000 Cambodian soldiers, a total of 74,000 men. On the south was the 1st and 2nd Divisions of the 1st and 2nd Divisions of the 1st C Division. They had a total of 17,000 soldiers. Among them, C's 2nd Division Zhao Changchao had already captured Pearl Island, later known as Phuket Island, cutting off Siam's southern road by land. After C's 1st Division occupied Samui Island, they used the water to enter the land and surrounded Pattaya, later known as Tabaya, which was southeast of Bangkok, forming complete control over the entire southern sea of Siam. When the North Army left Wanxiang City, they caught the Siam Army off guard. Over the past few days, the Siam Army had gotten used to the five-star Army's defense and did not expect them to suddenly attack. The 20,000 unprepared Siam Army was crippled by the 2nd and 6th Divisions of the Lu Army. Amidst the sounds of gunfire, they were defeated. In less than an hour they left behind 3,000 corpses and fled. Luo Pajuan left the task of cleaning up the battlefield to the 40,000 Lao soldiers led by Long Tainan and General He Guang. Then he continued to lead the 2 army divisions to Wulong City, an important city in the north of Siam. At this moment, Siam's General Godin was in the city. He had just heard the news of the 5-star Army's attack. Not long after, he saw his soldiers being defeated. He also saw the 5-star Army soldiers in green chasing after his soldiers. The intelligence personnel had already reported the information. Every 5-star Army soldier who could wear a formal suit belonged to the elite faction. They were not easy to deal with. Although Godin had 200,000 soldiers, he did not dare to be careless. He immediately ordered his men to prepare to defend the city. Cannons, bows, rocks and kerosene were all prepared. For the sake of safety, he didn't even have the slightest intention of letting the 10,000 defeated soldiers outside the city into the city. Chapter 1039. If they didn't open the gates, they would only lose 10,000 soldiers. Once they opened the gates, the main force would be in danger. With the city's defense and the 50 cannons, they might be able to inflict heavy damage to the main force of the 5-star Army. General Gordon was ambitious. This time he wanted to use his actions to humiliate the 5-star Army. He wanted to tell them that the Siamese Army wasn't like the Tsanglan Army or the Phnom Penh Army. They were capable of fighting. While Gordon was waiting for the enemy to approach the city, the 5-star Corps stopped moving. They took out their 100mm mortars and aimed at the city tower. Gordon was waiting for the enemy to approach the city so that he could destroy one of them with his cannons. The 5-star Corps stopped moving. They took out their 100mm mortars and aimed at the city tower. Looking down from above, Gordon saw that the 5-star Army stopped moving when they were 5 miles away. He didn't understand what they were up to. He didn't have to wait for long before reality told him the truth. Luo Pu ordered the cannons to open fire. The mortar cannons could fire up to 13 li away. Using Wulong City, which was only 5 li away, as a target, it was as easy as playing a game. A total of 40 cannons rained down on the city walls, causing blood to splatter everywhere. Gordon, who was waiting for the enemy to approach, didn't expect the enemy to open fire from such a distance. His cannons could only fire up to a distance of 1,000 meters. This caused him to subconsciously limit his vision. Then, amidst the explosions, he was knocked to the ground by the shockwave. Fortunately, the soldiers beside him were very diligent. They pushed General Gordon to the ground. With 1 dead, 1 heavily injured, and 2 lightly injured, Gordon was safe and sound. He only lost his hearing temporarily. Not only Gordon, the Siamese soldiers on the city tower also lost their hearing. Other than the buzzing sound, they couldn't hear anything from the outside world. After a round of bombardment, the 2nd and 6th Divisions started to charge forward. To the cold front warriors who had to train at least 3 to 5 kilometers a day, a distance of 2,500 meters was nothing. Under the cover of the artillery, they arrived at the city gate that had already been destroyed. After a round of gunfire, they opened up a path and easily killed their way into the city. On the tower, the 50 cannons that had been transported to the North Tower had been reduced to a pile of scrap metal. Beside him, there were almost 1,000 dead bodies of the Siamese soldiers. The other survivors, including General Gordon, had already fled downstairs. In other words, it wasn't that they were useless. It was that their opponents were too strong. Facing the 2nd and 6th Division, who were fully equipped with firearms, the Siamese soldiers were caught off guard. They didn't even know much about them. Thus, they suffered a great loss in the first battle. The 200,000 soldiers of the Siamese army retreated like fish in the sea. It could be said that human potential was infinite. With the mentality of saving their lives, the Siamese soldiers retreated so quickly that the 5-star army couldn't catch up to them. Except for a few who managed to catch up, the main force of the Siamese army fled south. After the victory of the first battle, they killed and captured 30,000 Siamese soldiers. Wulong City was handed over to the Laotian army. After a simple rest, Luo Yin led the 2 divisions and continued south. The news of the defeat on the northern battlefield quickly spread back to Manga City. In the palace hall, King Yi Liqi showed an expression of disbelief, and asked a very idiotic question in front of all the civil and military officials. What is the 5-star army doing? Are they going to destroy Siam like they did to Lansang and Golden Rim? Proud people would always magnify their own strengths for no reason, but at the same time, they would also magnify their enemies' weaknesses. In Yi Liqui's eyes, Siam was the strongest army in the world. Perhaps it was a little weaker than the 5-star army, but they had their own strengths. How could they be bullied so easily? Yi Liqui's shout attracted a lot of discussion in the palace. Then Prime Minister Hamad stood up and said, "Your Majesty, the 5-star army is coming. Looking at the fate of Lansang and Golden Rim, we must be prepared for a war." Sure, let's fight. Who's afraid? Siam had just entered the era of big cities. In comparison, its politics were clean and the people were loyal. Its strength was not weak. This was also where Yi Liqui's foundation lay. Before the war, Yi Liqui had found Hamad and a few other important officials. After a discussion, they agreed that the 5-star army was not strong enough to destroy Siam. In other words, even if they lost the war, they could just lower their heads and give some compensation. The possibility of the country being destroyed was still very small. It was because of this point that Yi Liqui agreed to send troops. He wanted to take the 5-star army by surprise and reshuffle the cards in Southeast Asia. Now it seemed that it did play a role in the early stages. They even surrounded Yang Qindong. At that time, victory was so close. Unfortunately, Tong Si did not take advantage of this opportunity. In the end, he missed out on victory. Since they could not win, they had to think about how to stay in an invincible position. Considering the plan prepared before the war, Prime Minister Hamad continued, "Your Majesty, I request to send a message to the 5-star army to negotiate. Please allow it." Proved. Yi Liqui had to nod and agree. Unless he was prepared to fight to the death with the 5-star army, he could only negotiate and use this method to quell the flames of war. Under the cold consent of King Yi Liqui, the royal capital Bangkok once again gathered 200,000 troops to prepare for war. They were ready to support the various battlefields at any time. At the same time, they also sent a message to the 5-star army to express their intention to negotiate. The so-called peace talks were often the result of fighting. Fighting and fighting, fighting and fighting, everything came to a conclusion. In the end, it was a happy scene for everyone. After the Siam army lost the upper hand, the news of peace talks came. The commander of the East Army, Yang Qindong, who was leading the army to Siam, laughed after hearing the news. All of this was within his expectations. He even sent a telegram to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in advance and asked them to send people over. Peace talks? They killed so many of our brothers. Now that our reinforcements are here, they are afraid? They want peace talks. How can there be such a good thing in the world? Beta Persei muttered to express his anger. Beta Persei's opinion made Yang Qindong speechless. In this battle, more than 200 black cavalry soldiers and more than 4,000 soldiers of the 5th Division died. It was a heavy loss. But in comparison, what benefits did the Siam army gain? The number of people captured and killed had exceeded 120,000. This was already a 30-fold loss ratio. At this moment, the king of Siam was the one suffering, not him. But then again, the lives of the 5-star army soldiers were very important. How could it be compared to the Siam army? From this point of view, Beta Persei's words were not wrong. That's right. It's impossible to talk about peace and let this matter slide. This time we are determined to get Siam. Yang Qindong's attitude was very firm. Beta Persei's eyes lit up when he heard this. However, Yang Qindong's next words made Beta Persei a little confused. But based on the information we have, Siam prepared a full 800,000 soldiers before this battle. So far, we have destroyed about 200,000 soldiers. There are at least 600,000 soldiers left. Beta Persei, tell me, with our current strength can we defeat them? Yes, 600,000 is. Beta Persei stopped mid-sentence. This was 600,000, not 60,000. The total number of soldiers of the 5-star armies, even if the average D ping were to be included, they would only have around 150 to 160,000 men. Even if they wanted to destroy the enemy, they still had to split up their forces to defend the cities that they had occupied. Beta Persei did not speak, and Yang Qindong did not intend to ask any more questions. Instead, he looked thoughtfully in the direction of Siam. A bold plan was formed in his mind again. This plan could be expressed in a very simple way. There were only 4 words: training troops on the battlefield. Soldiers who had never been on the battlefield could not be considered real warriors. This was true for ordinary soldiers. After a few battles, Yang Qindong had already seen his disadvantage. That was, he had too few troops. If he was so weak to deal with the Siam army, wouldn't he be in the same predicament if he was forced to fight against a bigger force in the future? For the future, he also needed to prepare for military training. How could he create a decent army in a short period of time? Their strength could not be said to be on par with the Cold Front, but at least they had to meet the requirements of a B-level army. After thinking about it, the only good idea was to train troops on the battlefield. With the 600,000 soldiers of Siam as a whetstone, Yang Qindong wanted to see how many B-level troops he could train. In order to achieve this goal, more local battles were needed. That was to say, how to fight the Siamese army continuously and make them send out their troops without getting angry became the most important thing. Thinking about it carefully, it seemed that the best way was to talk while fighting. That was why he was so optimistic and hopeful about the upcoming negotiations between the two sides. Before Yang Qindong had to wait too long, someone from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs came. It was their minister Ma Dali. Yang Qindong was somewhat surprised by Ma Dali's personal visit. He was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who stayed in Chichen City to preside over the overall situation. How could he come out so easily? Seeing the obvious doubt in Yang Qindong's eyes, Ma Dali smiled bitterly and said, "Sixth young master, for the current Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the most important thing is the war with Siam, so I came in person." Chapter 1040. Haha. Hearing Ma Dali's sincere answer, Yang Qindong smiled. Diplomatic work was usually divided into 3 types: enemies, friends, and countries, regions, or forces in the middle. However, Yang Xie rarely had any hostile forces around him. In the end, it was because of their military and financial strength. It was said that a weak country had no diplomacy. If Yang Qindong were to add another sentence, it would be to strengthen the diplomacy of the strong. Yes, whether it was a strong military or economic power, diplomatic work was relatively easier. Whether it was because of the desire for benefits or the fear of military power, no one was willing to provoke a strong country or force. Therefore, compared to the heavy work of other departments, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was much more relaxed. Finally, there was a strong country like Siam, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs finally had a chance to show its strength. As the minister, Ma Dali simply volunteered to be here. Since the previous minister, Yang Shan, stepped down because of his son, Yang Taizhu, Ma Dali had not achieved any outstanding results. Without any achievements, how could he convince the masses? Even when Yu Qian, as the city lord of Crimson City, held meetings with the status of Prime Minister Yang, Ma Dali rarely spoke. He had been looking for an opportunity to show his strength. Now that the opportunity had come, how could he let it go? After knowing Ma Dali's thoughts, Yang Qindong did not make any comments. A subordinate who wanted to achieve results should not be discouraged. On the contrary, he should encourage him. "Minister Ma, you have come this time. Whether you can defeat Siam or even win this war completely depends on your diplomatic skills. As long as you can hold them back, the longer the time, the greater the chance of victory. What do you think? Are you confident?" Yang Qindong was telling him the truth. Ma Dali took this opportunity to ask carefully, "Sixth young master, have you made up your mind? Do you really want to defeat Siam in one go?" Ma Dali was like a poisonous needle that was inserted into the enemy's heart. Yang Qindong naturally had no intention of hiding it from him. "That's right. I've already made my decision." But Ma Dali hesitated for a moment. When he saw Yang Qindong's encouraging eyes, he continued, "But according to our investigation, Siam has just become a big city. Whether it is military, political, or economic, they are not weak. It will be difficult to take them down in one go." "Difficult? It's like a spring. If you're strong, it's weak. Yang Qindong didn't care if the other party knew what a spring was, or if he could understand this saying. He still said decisively, if a person wants to grow, he has to go through some setbacks and difficulties. Similarly, if Yangxia wants to expand, it has to do something that it knows is difficult. As long as it overcomes these difficulties, it will become stronger. Understood. Since Yang Qindong had already made up his mind, Ma Dali knew that there was no room for negotiation. He said, "Sixth young master, tell me, what do you want me to do next? What do I have to do?" "Aha, it's actually not complicated. You just have to do this and that will do." No one knew what Yang Qindong and Ma Dali talked about, but they only knew that early the next morning Ma Dali had set up a carriage and led a delegation of more than 100 people, representing the interests of the Yang faction, straight to Manga City. It was inevitable that some of the military officers couldn't understand the departure of the peace negotiators, especially the commander of the 5th Division, Xiao Yining. In the battle on the Barren Mountain, half of his division had died. This was a grudge that must be avenged. Why would they suddenly enter into a state of peace negotiations? Lu Zhua, the commander of the new army's 1st Cavalry Division, was also puzzled. He had traveled thousands of miles, taking a boat and rushing day and night. He hadn't even fought a single battle, and now they were going to negotiate? Then what was the point of him bringing the 1st Cavalry Division here? In the main tent, whether it was Xiao Yining or Lu Zhua, after Yang Qindong said that they could say anything and ask anything, the two of them took the lead to speak, expressing the puzzlement in the hearts of their subordinates. In response to their questions, Yang Qindong only replied, "Who said we're not going to fight?" Just this one sentence confused the two commanders. Xiao Yining reacted a little faster. "But didn't we already send people to negotiate with Siam?" "That's right," Lu Zhua quickly added. "Who said that we can't continue fighting if we're negotiating? It doesn't matter. They can talk, we'll fight." Yang Qindong waved his hand casually again as if they had all misunderstood. In response to Yang Qindong's answer, not only the two commanders, but also the other commanders in the main tent were confused. Even the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Tian Hu, was puzzled. He also didn't understand what the 6th young master was going to do. What? Is it hard to understand? The young master meant that the war and peace negotiations can be carried out at the same time. However, when we fight, we don't have to send our main force to the front like before. Instead, we can send our reserve troops to the front. We can use this opportunity to see if there are any suitable seedlings. Yang Qindong saw that everyone was confused, so he simply explained it clearly. As soon as he said this, a few people were the first to understand. Especially Commander Tian Hu. Where did his 1st Cavalry Division come from? Wasn't it formed by constantly fighting on the battlefield and gathering elites? This was going to continue the old path. Naturally, he had the most right to speak. He immediately said, "The 6th young master means to train the soldiers through war?" "That's what I mean. Of course, as veterans who have experienced hundreds of battles, this time, you have to do your job as instructors. Not only that, once you find a good seedling, you can apply for recruitment. The young master will give you a certain amount of talent support. Of course, you have to do your job as instructors and examiners. You have to score every soldier in the war. This is an extremely important matter. Do you understand?" When he said these words, Yang Qindong especially looked at the commander of the 5th Cavalry Division, Xiao Yining. The meaning he wanted to express was very clear. Isn't the 5th Cavalry Division lacking in soldiers? Once this war is over, the 5th Cavalry Division can be reorganized. Even though Yang Qindong's meaning was very clear, and Xiao Yining was indeed moved, there was still a problem that he didn't clarify. Otherwise he really wouldn't be happy. The 6th young master, if his performance is outstanding, can he be promoted? Of course. Otherwise, how can he join the 5th Cavalry Division? Yang Qindong said as if it was a matter of course. "Good. I understand." At this moment, Xiao Yining's face finally revealed a smile. At this moment he even became a little excited. He was still thinking that with the current ratio of young and strong Han men in Crimson City, it would be difficult to recruit more than 4,000 people. If things went wrong, it would affect the strength of the 5th Cavalry Division. Now that they could train the soldiers on the battlefield and recruit good seedlings, the 5th Cavalry Division would definitely be able to quickly return to its former glory. After the general plan was set, Yang Qindong announced a few more details. For example, only those who killed 10 people on the battlefield would be allowed to be promoted. Other than that, those who performed well would be able to enter the B-grade troops, the auxiliary troops of Crimson City, and those who performed well would be able to enter the C-grade troops, the provincial troops. As for those who didn't perform well, they would be given money to chase them away. In short, they would only fight for the sake of producing elite soldiers. If there were really no suitable candidates, it would be better to not have them than to form an army for the sake of numbers. Otherwise, not only would they be scamming them, they would also be scamming themselves. On the battlefield, the enemy wouldn't be afraid because of the number of soldiers you had. On the battlefield, victory wouldn't be decided by who had more soldiers. Using battle to nurture soldiers was carried out in an orderly manner under Yang Qindong's decision. According to his requirements, any commoner between the age of 16 and 35 who was under the Yang faction's influence could sign up. Then, the various cities would report the list to the various provincial governments, and in the end the provincial governments would transport the people to the battlefield. In order to encourage people to sign up, Yang Qindong also proposed that the number of soldiers each province could choose would have a close relationship with the provincial governor and the various officers at the end of the year. In the end, there would be a reward system, praising the provinces that performed well and scolding the provinces that didn't, etc. The temptation of being promoted was already very big, and now that it was directly related to the official rank evaluation, who wouldn't want to try their best? Immediately, under the encouragement and publicity of the local governments, there were many people who signed up. Batches of young men who met the requirements were sent to the North Army's new Second Army, Luo Po's, and the East Army's Yang Qindong's. In the East Army, the first army that was approved to train soldiers was the 50,000 Cambodian soldiers who followed Yang Qindong. Of course, this was not all the soldiers of the right age in Cambodia. With a population of 4 million, it was not a problem to select a few 100,000 suitable soldiers. These 50,000 soldiers were just the first batch of soldiers to be sent to the battlefield. The power of training soldiers was completely delegated to the 3 division commanders, Tian Hu, Xiao Yining, and Lu Zhua. After a discussion, they decided to only send 2,000 recruits to the battlefield at a time. In order to ensure that they would not be surrounded by the Siamese Army, the 1st Cavalry Division, the 1st Cavalry Division of the new 1st Army, and the 5th Division of the Lu Zhua Po would send veterans to accompany them. They would only be sent out when they encountered suitable opponents, so as to ensure that they could complete the training requirements under the circumstances of equal strength and strength. The 5-star Army had sent out envoys according to the king's request, and the troops were heading to the capital, Bangkok. For this reason, it was said that the 5-star Army in the south had stopped their attack on Pattaya. After receiving this news, the Siamese Army, which was originally very nervous, immediately relaxed. Chapter 1041. It was at this time that a scout suddenly reported that a small unit of the 5-star Army had left the border city of Bob and was heading towards Shafa City. After hearing the news, the Siamese Army was very puzzled. The Siamese general guarding Shafa City immediately sent people to stop them, as if he wanted to persuade them to stop moving forward. In the middle of Bob and Shafa City, the two sides met. On one side was a Cambodian army of 2,000 people, and on the other side was a Siamese army of 5,000 people. The veterans of the 5-star Army who followed and protected them quickly made a decision. This battle was worth fighting. At least in their eyes, if they were the ones fighting, they would not need 2,000 people, but 1,000 people would be enough to win. With this decision, the first training of the soldiers began. The mixed soldiers were mixed soldiers. They did not have much training and most of them relied on brute force. The result of the first battle was no surprise. More than 300 of the 2,000 soldiers were killed on the spot, and the rest fled back. According to the information obtained by the veteran scouts, not even 100 Siamese soldiers were killed. When the news reached Yang Qindong's ears, he was not surprised at all. Some soldiers who had not undergone systematic training were just a bunch of brute force. They did not even have a basic degree of cooperation. It was impossible for them to defeat the disciplined Siamese army. Just like the so-called Jianghu people, they might be a headache if they fought alone, but once they gathered together, no matter how many of them there were, they would not be a match for the imperial army. If the army made up of Lao men really wanted to win, they would have to learn how to cooperate, get used to blood, and really mature. Then they might have the qualifications to defeat the Siamese army. Of course, this was not something that could be done overnight. Fortunately, Yang Qindong had time to wait. Even if more of these people died, Yang Qindong would not show any sadness. These were all alien races, and for a certain period of time, he had even thought about how to stop the growth of the alien race population, and what kind of attitude and methods he should adopt towards these adult alien males. This was one of the methods that Yang Qindong had thought of. This was one of the methods that Yang Qindong had thought of when a foreign woman married a Han man. From the looks of it, the effects were pretty good. Now that they had the advantage of sacrificing foreign men on the battlefield, even if foreign women wanted to get married in the future, they would have no choice but to choose Han men. This was a way to eliminate the foreign race. At the same time, it was also a kind of gospel for the Han men. It was also a vicious method that Yang Qindong used to unify the Han people. Perhaps some people could see this point. Perhaps there would be people in the future who would comment on this matter. Some people might even criticize his backbone because of this, but Yang Qindong did not care. What he wanted was the day when the Han people became strong and dominated the world. As for what others thought of him, it was not important. To paraphrase a saying, who cares if there is a flood after his death? The first attack failed, but soon the second Cambodian army was sent out. They were either inspired by the fact that the five-star army with less than 10,000 people could fight for so long against the Siamese army and won a great victory, so they looked down on the Siamese army. Or maybe the conditions that Yang Qindong gave to the victors were so good that they could not bear to try. Or maybe it was because they wanted to prove themselves through this battle. They wanted to tell their relatives in their hometown and their women that the five-star army was not the only one in the world who knew how to fight. They were real men and they could do it too. Regardless of the reason, there were waves of Cambodian soldiers. Under the control of the five-star army, they were divided into groups of 2,000 people and entered the Siamese territory, looking for an opportunity to fight the Siamese army. At this moment, in the capital of Siam, Mangu City, Minister Ma Dali had appeared as the representative of Yang Xie. He was warmly received by Prime Minister Hamad. What was a politician? The performance of the two men was obvious. No matter how fierce the battle was before and how many people were killed or injured, when they met this time, their faces were full of joy. Those who did not know the inside story would definitely think that the two men must be old friends. They would never think that they were scheming against each other. On the way into the city, Hamad even prepared a small welcoming ceremony to show the people that Siam still loved peace. Even when the situation was good, they still negotiated with the emissary sent by Yang Xie. This showed that they were broad-minded. Yes, in the hearts of most of the Siamese who did not know the situation, they were the most powerful when they had just entered the city. Even in this battle against the five-star army from the beginning until now, they had always been in a dominant position. Not long ago, there was news that the leader of the five-star army was surrounded by them. If it were not for the sake of peace in the future and wanting to persuade the leader to surrender, they would have killed him directly. That was a war where hundreds of thousands of people surrounded less than 10,000 enemies. Even if everyone spat, the war would have ended. Ma Dali walked beside Hammond with a smile on his face as they crossed the street. In fact, he and his team had heard the discussions of the people on the streets. Those who were able to enter the Foreign Affairs Department were naturally knowledgeable people. Among them, there were many graduates of the Yang Family Academy and the Crimson City Academy. When they entered the school, they were exposed to a course called Foreign Languages. In the words of the founder, Yang Qindong, if you want to defeat your enemy, you must first understand your enemy. For this reason, Ma Dali had brought many talents who understood Siamese into this team. Even he had no problem conversing with them. With this advantage, the conversations of the people on the street naturally fell into their ears. This allowed them to have a deeper understanding of the situation in Bangkok and obtain first-hand information. All of this was outside of Hamad's expectations. He was certain that there were people who understood Siamese in this team, just like how there were people who understood Chinese beside him. However, the number was definitely not too many. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lined the streets to express his sincerity. Both parties passed through the commotion and finally arrived at the courtyard in the city that was specially used to receive foreign ambassadors. Upon entering, the originally smiling Ma Dali and Hamad seemed to have changed into a different person. Their smiles were retracted and replaced with a solemn expression. Esteemed envoy Ma, you must be tired from the long journey. Take a rest for the night. If there is anything else, we will discuss it tomorrow. Hamad didn't immediately enter his role. He needed to give Ma Dali some time to rest. He also needed to think carefully about what to do next. Ma Dali acted as if he didn't understand Hamad's words. Only when the interpreter translated the words into Chinese did he nod and say, "Thank you for your understanding. Since that is the case, we will meet again tomorrow." When he said that he would see her the next day, no one would have thought that this delay would be half a month later. Of course, at this moment, Hamad was truly prepared to have a good discussion with Ma Dali tomorrow and see what the other party wanted. Therefore, after settling down the five-star army ambassadors, he headed straight for the palace. According to his intention, he would first report to the king and receive a general decree. Upon entering the palace, not only did Hamad see the king Yi Liqui, he also saw another first-rank general guarding the western border of Siam, Chun Hong. According to the Great Ming Dynasty system, Chun Hong was considered a relative of the emperor. His sister married Yi Liqui and was deeply favored by the emperor. Because of this, he was promoted several times from a small general station with 100 soldiers. In the end, he became a first-rank general, second only to Gordon. Relatives of the king were not allowed to interfere in politics. This was the same everywhere. Thus, Chun Hong had no choice but to leave the capital and head to the safest western border of Siam. He became a first-rank general in name and was mainly responsible for dealing with the Awol dynasty. To put it bluntly, he was completely a figurehead. This time they had started an all-out war with the Five-Star Army. They had seized the initiative and were now in a stalemate. The situation was gradually developing in a bad direction. It could be said that it was the time for the entire country to mobilize their troops. As a first-rank general, Chun Hong naturally returned. Not only that, when he returned, he brought with him good news that he had just received from the military. The Five-Star Army's attacks from the north and east had suddenly become weak. News of the Siam Army's victories came from the front lines. Translator. Nyoibo Studio Editor. Nyoibo Studio. Good news made Yelinki very happy. After knowing the purpose of Chun Huang's visit, Yelinki immediately welcomed him. Yelinki knew the whole story and knew that the Five-Star Army had been launching attacks every day. Although the scale of the attacks was not very big, it was a real attack. The Siamese army naturally fought back. Originally they were expecting a fierce battle. But who would have thought that the Five-Star Army could not fight anymore? Is this true? King Yi Liqui's face was filled with disbelief as he asked. Yes, there are battle reports from all sides. One of them was written by General Gordon himself. Chun Hong said with a face full of flattery and joy. As the saying goes, love the house and its crow. Since he liked Chun Huang's sister, Yi Liqui naturally did not dislike Chun Hong. Now that Chun Hong brought news of victory, he could not help but laugh heartily. This was the first time Yi Liqui laughed heartily since the start of the war with the Five-Star Army. At this time, Hammond entered the palace to report the situation. When he saw the king laughing so happily, he was also curious. Your Majesty, when did you become so happy? Tell me and I will be happy too. Ah, good. General Chun, tell the Prime Minister about this. Yi Liqui was in a good mood and immediately agreed. Chapter 1042. With a smile on his face, Chun Hong turned around and bowed to Hammond. He then said, Prime Minister, news just came from the front lines. The Five-Star Army's attack is weak. After several battles they have suffered heavy losses. Our side has won. And this is all thanks to His Majesty. His Majesty's troops represent the righteous. Even the heavenly sect was moved, resulting in today's victory. Chun Hong did not forget to take the opportunity to flatter the king. At the same time, he was carefully observing Hammond's reaction. Just like in most dynasties, civil and military were at odds. In Siam, civil and military rarely got along. In particular, the reason why Chun Hong left the capital for Shijiang was because of the advice of Hammond and the other civil officials. He hated these people from the bottom of his heart. But because the king valued these civil officials, he had no choice but to deal with them. But no action did not mean no thoughts. During his time in Shijiang, Chun Hong was constantly thinking about revenge. This time he was looking for an opportunity to do so. In his view, if he wanted to take revenge, the first person he had to deal with was the Prime Minister, who wielded enormous influence in the court. If he did not topple this mountain, once the war was over, he would probably have to return to the western border to suffer. Prime Minister Hammond didn't think too much about it. At least at this moment, his mind was completely focused on government affairs. When he heard Chun Hong say that the situation on the front lines was starting to turn for the better, he was truly confused. If not for the fact that he understood General Gordon and knew that this person was the worst at lying, he would have doubted the veracity of this matter. Since even General Gordon said that the front lines had won, Hammond had to think carefully about what was going on. From the bottom of his heart, Hammond did not believe it. A five-star army that could defeat the Jiaoji Kingdom, the Lansang Dynasty, and the Golden Bian Dynasty, as well as occupy the Luzon Island and a large area of the sea, they stunned everyone from the moment they appeared. With their strong financial resources and powerful military capabilities, there were few who would not follow their orders. How could such an army suddenly have such a low combat strength? This didn't make any sense at all. Hammond suddenly stopped talking. He didn't express any opinion and just stood there with a frown on his face. Chun Hong saw all of this and it was difficult for him to find a weakness. He had no choice but to continue asking. Prime Minister? Why do you look unhappy? Are you unhappy that the army won the battle at the front lines? After this reminder, even King Ili Chi paid attention to it. But out of trust he still said, how can that be? The Prime Minister is the Prime Minister of Siam. He will naturally be happy to hear that the frontline army has won the battle. Yes, of course I'm happy. At this moment, Hammond also recovered and hurriedly replied. But after saying this he still voiced out his doubts. It's just that the 5-star army has always been known for their extraordinary combat strength. Why did they suddenly become weak this time? Weakened? Chun Hong finally caught the opportunity and said, how can it be weakened? It should be because our Siam army is too strong. Under His Majesty's wise leadership, we have vigorously developed our military. The treatment and training of the army are the best. Why can't such a good army win the battle? Prime Minister, as a general leading an army, I really can't agree with what you're saying. The Siamese army was indeed stronger than the other neighboring countries. But if it was said that they could easily defeat the 5-star army, Hammond would never believe it. He decided to see for himself and personally go to the front line to see for himself. Your Majesty, I am willing to go to the front line. Please allow it. This was Hammond's strength. He would not easily agree with the opinions of others. He would only make a decision after seeing the results. This was also the reason why Ili Chi felt at ease using him, so he didn't even hesitate and agreed to this request. Hammond had something on his mind, so he didn't stay for long. Before he left, he only said that the emissary from the 5-star army had arrived, and before the battle was completely settled, he still had to receive him with courtesy. He then left the palace hall, leaving behind Chun Hong to watch him leave. He said with some dissatisfaction, Your Majesty, he doesn't trust our army and General Gordon. Sigh, General Chun, don't think too much. Prime Minister is such a serious person. It's good to let him see. That way we can rest assured. Ili Kui was not influenced by Chun Huang's words. In his heart he didn't really believe this news. He also hoped that someone could make a trip. Hammond's volunteering was exactly what he wanted. Ma Dali, who was in the emissary group's courtyard, did not know about this. The next morning, not only did he not see Hammond, who was supposed to be here, but everyone was also grounded. Considering that the two countries were at war, they were not allowed to leave the courtyard for fear of being affected. Fortunately, food and drinks were delivered in time. Otherwise, the minister would have to consider whether Siam was going to reveal their true intentions. The training of the soldiers on the northern and eastern fronts continued. The battle situation did not improve. The 40,000 Laotian soldiers on the northern front and the 50,000 Cambodian soldiers on the eastern front were sent out for battle for the third time. Relatively speaking, they would still lose against the Siam army. It was just that they did not lose as quickly. However, it was still far from a draw. It was also at this time that a steady stream of reserve troops arrived. After receiving Yang Qindong's orders, the provinces immediately started recruiting soldiers. The attractive policies were also spread to all the provinces under Yang Xie's control. Once they performed well, they could be promoted. Such a temptation tempted the foreign youths, who knew the power of the Han people, to no avail. With the opportunity in front of them, there were not many who did not want to seize it and give it a try. There were many such applicants. In a short period of time, 200,000 youths had signed up. It was said that this was only a portion of the total. There would be more applicants in the future. Since there were so many people who wanted to sign up, Yang Qindong naturally did not reject any of them. Yang Xie, who did not lack food, was never afraid of having too many people. He only despised having too few people. When the new batch of soldiers arrived, the disadvantage on the battlefield became even more obvious. In contrast, the morale of the Siam army was increasing day by day. The continuous victories had made some of the soldiers feel smug. When they found out that as long as they encountered the 5-star army, they would definitely be the ones to win. Although they didn't get much, they still had some achievements. They could report their military exploits and receive money. Therefore, everyone became more active. This was especially true when they discovered that their numbers were too large and they often couldn't find an opponent. When their numbers were only around 2,000, the 5-star army would take the initiative to jump out. They immediately divided their troops into groups of 2,000, allowing them to obtain more small-scale victories. A small victory was still a victory. Wasn't there a saying that went, "Many a little makes a man"? The Siam army was tirelessly busy. There were reports of victory every day. They were delivered to the commander of the army. Prime Minister Hammond, who had come to understand the actual situation, saw everything clearly. The battle reports were real. From time to time, some corpses of the 5-star army soldiers would be sent back. These could not be faked. All of this made Hammond speechless. Even the Siam army in the east had achieved such a great victory. With General Gordon leading the army in the north, there was nothing to doubt about the results. What was going on? Was the 5-star army's strength not enough due to the continuous expansion? Or was their standard just average to begin with? It was just that people had made them legends. Hammond could not understand this question. However, there was no need to think about it. Since they had achieved victory on the battlefield, there was nothing to be afraid of. He had to immediately return to the capital to report. At the same time, he had to change his strategy against the 5-star army. Negotiations could be discussed. However, this time he did not have to compromise. Instead, he had to force the other party to compromise. This was something he had to consider. Satisfied, Hammond left. On the morning of his departure, news came from the Security Bureau. Yang San had arranged for Yun Ke, who was recuperating in Chichen City, to return to Siam. With Golden Rooster Wu Gui's mistake, Skylark certainly didn't dare to be negligent and relax. He secretly watched the situation closely. As soon as the people left, the news came. They're gone? It's time to win a few battles to boost morale. After reading the report from the Security Bureau, Yang Qindong happily said to Beta Persei beside him, "Have you calculated the number of qualified soldiers in the past 20 days? Young Master Tianhu Xiaoyining and Lu Zhua have reported the data every day. As of last night, there are about 35,000 soldiers who can be considered veterans." Beta Persei quickly replied. It was obvious that he had learned a lot from following Yang Qindong. This number is not low. Yang Qindong seemed surprised. He silently calculated in his heart. It turned out that they had trained nearly 2,000 soldiers every day. This was the benefit of actual combat. Survival of the fittest, war had the final say. Facts had the final say. In between life and death, people's potential could often be maximized. With that in mind, Yang Qindong opened his mouth again. Since it's like this, inform the 3 division commanders, they can adopt the strategy of the old leading the new. Out of the 2,000 men, they can choose 500 old soldiers to lead 1,500 new soldiers, and if the old soldiers have outstanding performance, they can be gathered together, and according to their performance, this young master will promote them, and according to their performance, we can decide if they will enter the A-grade army or B-grade army, and they can be the best candidates for the various divisions. Chapter 1043. After 20 days of training, there were finally results. Beta Persei also agreed happily. And it was from this day onwards that the situation on the battlefield began to change subtly. Similarly, the enemy was no longer defeated by the 5-star army after encountering each other. Sometimes they could even fight to a draw, and occasionally they could even turn defeat into victory. At first, the Siamese army did not feel anything about the changes on the battlefield. When someone reported the situation to his superior, the general did not take it seriously. He thought that it must be his soldiers who were slacking off. That was why they praised the enemy so highly. For this reason, the general even scolded a few of the informants. He suppressed the informants with the authority of a superior officer. Suppressing the gourd would lead to the emergence of the ladle. Suppressing some matters by force might not necessarily lead to a good outcome. What was more frightening was that on the battlefield, if you underestimated your opponent, there would only be one outcome: death or defeat. In the blink of an eye, 10 days had passed. More and more ambitious young men under the Yangxia forces came to the battlefield. More and more people began to participate in the battle and displayed their advantages. As the number of actual combat increased, many men with excellent results were reflected. Among them, the number of people who were promoted by Yang Qindong alone exceeded 5,000. All of them had been tested in actual combat. They had participated in more than 20 battles, both large and small. Among them, the weakest one had accumulated 20 kills on the battlefield. With the demonstration of these 5,000 young men, the young men of the other races were greatly stimulated. They performed even more bravely and fiercely on the battlefield, strengthening the transition from new recruits to old soldiers, and also increasing the proportion of old soldiers. At one point, the number of old soldiers had reached over 60,000. The 5-star army had achieved such great results. The Siamese army felt it the most. They had originally prepared 120,000 people, all of whom were trained soldiers. But now the number of people was less than 50,000. Seeing that the five-star army's offensive did not weaken and was still so strong, they had no choice but to send a request for reinforcements to the capital. It wasn't that they couldn't defeat the five-star army, and it wasn't that they didn't fight with their lives on the line. It was just that there were too many of them, so many that it seemed like they would never be able to kill them. In fact, the five-star army had paid a heavy price. Countless recruits had died in the first battle. In terms of numbers, they were not inferior to the Siamese army. Mango City suddenly received a request for reinforcements from the East Army, which was beyond the king's expectations. Didn't they say that the battle at the front lines was going well and that the five-star army had suffered heavy losses and that they wouldn't be able to hold on if this continued? Why was it his own side that needed reinforcements? What kind of situation was this? Countless question marks involuntarily appeared in his mind. Liqui immediately summoned Prime Minister Hammond and First-Rank General Chun Hong to seek their opinions. The two representatives of the civil and military officials hurried into the palace. Just as they were confused, Liqui threw an urgent letter for help at their feet with an unfriendly expression. Take a look and see what's going on. The two picked up the letter and their expressions quickly turned heavy. Chun Hong was the only first-rank general in the palace. In fact, he had been in charge of military affairs and understood the situation at the front lines very well. Indeed, the news of victory had been constantly spreading. As time passed, he had already gotten used to it. He wouldn't become so excited because of the news of victory. In fact, in his opinion, this battle should be over soon. Perhaps, it would be worth celebrating when they achieved a great victory over the five-star army. Needless to say, Hammond personally understood the situation at the front lines. 10 days ago, the news of victory was still spreading. Why did they need to request reinforcements from the royal capital so quickly? Could it be that the five-star army's reinforcements had arrived? When he thought of this, Hammond suddenly remembered something. The intelligence personnel he sent to investigate the five-star army hadn't contacted him for 7 to 8 days. Logically speaking, if there was any situation, they should have contacted him at least once every 3 to 5 days. But this time it was so long. Did something happen to them? What did this mean? The faces of the two ministers became heavy. However, without enough understanding, how could they know what to say at this moment? He was facing the king. One wrong word, one wrong decision, and it could bring about terrible consequences. The two didn't speak, but it didn't mean that the matter would pass. Looking at the two who had turned mute, Liqui's displeased voice sounded again. What? Why aren't you speaking? This king is asking for your opinion. Liqui was about to get angry. Chun Hong was afraid and couldn't help but raise his head and say, Your Majesty, perhaps the five-star army sent reinforcements. After all, the battle has been going on for almost a month and the battles are fierce every day. The soldiers at the front lines must be exhausted and need fresh blood to ensure victory. Exhausted? So in your opinion, are you going to agree to send reinforcements? Liqui heard this ambiguous answer and asked in displeasure. According to the rules of the battlefield, the soldiers can't be used frequently. We should send reinforcements. Chun Hong knew that he couldn't continue wavering. He could only grit his teeth and express his determination. After Chun Hong expressed his opinion, it was naturally Hammond's turn. Logically speaking, he had lost the support of his informants and should first understand the situation before making a final decision. But this time Liqui was in a fit of rage. If he gave such an answer, it was clearly inappropriate. During this period of time, Chun Hong had been active in the royal city. He had already roped in a lot of ministers and had also said a lot of bad things about himself. At this moment he absolutely could not do anything wrong. Otherwise it would be like handing over his weakness to his opponent. Your Majesty, this official also believes that we should send reinforcements. But the matters at the front lines shouldn't be too urgent. Your Majesty should also take care of your body. After coming to a decision, Hammond's expression relaxed and he replied fluently. Hearing Hammond's tone wasn't heavy and even seemed to be relaxed, Liqui's heart was greatly reassured. He knew his prime minister too well. He had always planned before acting. Since he said it was fine, then there shouldn't be much to worry about. But before Liqui could speak, Chun Hong, who saw him as a thorn in his side, took the initiative to express his opinion. Prime Minister, how can you be so sure that there won't be any problems? First there was a light chuckle. Then the confident Hammond said with confidence, There are 3 reasons. First, General Dong Dong sent an urgent message of 300 miles. If the matter is urgent, he should send an urgent message of 800 miles. Second, General Gordon of the Northern Army hasn't sent a signal for reinforcements. It can be seen that even if the 5-star army sent reinforcements, the scale is limited and can only support one side of the battle. Third, the location of the battle is within Siam. Compared to transporting supplies and fodder, we have a shorter distance and faster speed. Even if we compare the expenditure, the 5-star army won't be able to afford it. When the 3 points were mentioned, Ha Chunwang shut his mouth. He knew that he wasn't a match for a scholar in terms of eloquence. Moreover, this was the representative of scholars, Hammond. Hearing this, King Eliqui was very happy. Good, as expected of my Prime Minister. What you said is reasonable. Even if the 5-star army sent reinforcements, we should also send reinforcements. This time, we will let them see the strength of Siam and let them know that we aren't comparable to Lansang and Golden Rim. We, Siam, are the strongest and cannot be defeated. Following Eliqui's laughter, the matter of sending reinforcements to the Eastern Army was settled. In order to deal a heavy blow to the 5-star army, they sent out 100,000 reinforcements. At this point, Siam's original 800,000 troops had been sent out to 500,000, more than half of the original force. The scholar and military left the palace. Ha Chunwang snorted and rolled his eyes before leaving Hammond behind. He didn't bicker with him because he still had many things to do. For example, sending out intelligence agents to investigate the situation at the front lines and find out where the previous intelligence agents had gone. For example, it was time to have a discussion with Ma Dali. In his eyes, this was a war where both sides would suffer losses. The sooner they stopped fighting, the sooner both sides would benefit. And so, in the diplomatic mission's courtyard, after 25 days, almost a month, Ma Dali finally met with Hammond once again. Haha, Prime Minister, you are so busy. Upon meeting, Ma Dali mocked the other party. Speaking of which, he couldn't be blamed for being so angry. After being ignored for almost a month, anyone would be angry. Before coming, Hammond had already expected Yang Xie's special envoy to be unhappy. He immediately cupped his fist and said, "My apologies, my sincere apologies. There was a small problem at the front lines. I just finished dealing with it. The first thing I did after returning is to see you." A small problem at the front lines? What's the matter? Through the interpreter, Ma Dali pretended to understand and asked. At first he looked pained, then Hammond raised his head and said, "Isn't it because there are too many captives at the front lines? My king is benevolent and has sent these captives back to the royal capital. There are so many people who need to eat, so I, as the Prime Minister, have to take care of them. That is why I have neglected you. Please forgive me." As Hammond spoke, he paid attention to Ma Dali's reaction. He wanted to see something from this person's expression. But he didn't know that he didn't understand Ma Dali at all. Specifically, there were 3 things he didn't understand. First, as Yang Xie's foreign minister, Ma Dali's ability to communicate with people was outstanding. He was also the best at reading people's expressions. Any small mistake made by an opponent could be caught and analyzed. So, it was better to forget about playing mind games with such a person. It would be good enough if he didn't fall for others' schemes. Chapter 1044. Secondly, Ma Dali understood Siamese. After diligently studying for the past 20 days, he could be considered proficient. This gave him more room to think and react. On the surface, it seemed like he still needed to listen to the interpreter, but in reality he already knew the specifics and had already begun to react. Thirdly, and the most important one. This time the diplomatic mission was equipped with a telegraph. This meant that whenever he needed to know about anything that happened on the front lines, Yang Qindong would report it to him, allowing him to understand the battle situation and Yang Qindong's thoughts so that he could determine the next step. All of this had been carried out in secret. On the surface, it seemed like the 100-odd members of the diplomatic mission hadn't left the courtyard, but they were well aware of the situation outside. As for the specific changes on the battlefield, he had even learned of them a few days earlier than Hammond. With these 3 advantages, if Hammond still wanted to play tricks and schemes with Ma Dali, wouldn't that be asking for humiliation? It was clearly victory that had turned into defeat, yet Ma Dali was still pretending to be the victor in front of him. Hearing this, Ma Dali sneered in his heart, but pretended to be extremely shocked as if he was panicking. "What? Sir Minister said the 5-star army suffered a great defeat on the front lines? That's impossible, Impossible, our reinforcements will arrive soon, although they are untrained civilians. At this point, Madali suddenly shut his mouth, and with an awkward expression, he took a sip of water from the cup in front of him. It seemed like he did it in a moment of desperation, but it was actually for Hammond to hear. The crux of the matter was how he said it to the other party, and how much of it the other party would believe. From the looks of it, his goal should be achieved. Indeed, he had achieved his goal. Madali's performance was too realistic, and in addition to this sudden question, people would often involuntarily answer the most realistic situation. More importantly, Hammond was certain that Madali didn't know what had happened on the front lines, so he didn't have time to lie to the five-star army. Of course, the most important point was that the result of his analysis was that the five-star army had reinforcements. Madali's answer coincided with his own inference. However, he did not expect that the reinforcements would be untrained civilians. If all of this was true, Siam only needed to block the attacks of the five-star army to turn the tables and regain control of the battle. Immensely excited by this sudden news, Hammond suppressed his decision to negotiate with Madali. He only expressed his concern for food and accommodation, saying that since they were in Bangkok, they were guests. If there was anything they needed, they could ask at any time. Following that, Hammond left with an anxious expression. He was indeed a little anxious. He needed to report the situation to the king, and then reconsider how many reinforcements to send. In the Siamese palace, King Yaliki was overjoyed when he heard Hamad's report. So, the five-star army did send reinforcements, and it should have been discussed beforehand. It's just that they have no reinforcements to send, so they sent some civilians? Yes. This special envoy has been out for more than a month. Naturally, he wouldn't be clear about the situation on the battlefield. The fact that he mentioned reinforcements should be the policy that the five-star army agreed on before he came. Haha, congratulations, Your Majesty. The five-star army has sent out all of their elites, and now they even need to send in civilians. Facing these untrained people, apart from their numbers, there is nothing to be afraid of. Hammond bowed and congratulated. This caused Hammond to burst out in laughter. Ah, good. Lord Prime Minister, you've handled this matter well. Now that we know the truth about the five-star army, in your opinion, how should we deal with them? Your Majesty, I believe that the enemy's only advantage is their numbers. If we can dispatch more soldiers to join the battle and create an unstoppable momentum, I believe victory won't be too difficult. Hammond, who had already come up with a plan on the way here, said excitedly. Minister Zhou means to continue to send in reinforcements? Ili Chi roughly understood the meaning behind these words. Yes, continue to send in reinforcements. As long as we can defeat the five-star army, victory will not be difficult. We can even use this opportunity to expand the territory of our Siam kingdom. Hammond, who was brimming with confidence, had a smile and excitement on his face. Ili Chi had always valued Hammond's ability. After hearing his analysis, Ili Chi felt that it was reasonable. He nodded and said, there are still 300,000 soldiers in the capital waiting to be deployed. In your opinion, what should we do? Forgive me for being so bold, but Your Majesty, please show your courage and only leave 100,000 behind. Send 100,000 reinforcements to the north and east respectively. Attack with an overwhelming advantage and completely frighten the five-star army. Strike their morale, and this battle will determine the outcome. Right, since we have sent out so many reinforcements, the battle strategy must be changed. We can't just send out 2,000 people at a time to engage the enemy in guerrilla warfare. We should gather them together to achieve a deterrent effect. Good, then we will immediately convene a court meeting to hear the opinions of the officials. Seeing that Hammond's words were reasonable, Ili Chi had already agreed to 70% of it. The so-called meeting of the officials was just to discuss some specific matters. The king had already agreed in his heart, and the minister was also in full agreement. Naturally, no one in the court meeting would be blind enough to stop them. Even though Chun Hong wasn't happy that Hammond had stolen the limelight, he could only watch hatefully from the sidelines. After sending 100,000 reinforcements to the east, the capital sent another 100,000 to the north and east respectively. At this point, Siam Kingdom had sent out 700,000 of its 800,000 regular soldiers. It was not an exaggeration to call it a war of the entire country. Since Siam Kingdom sent reinforcements, Qingzi, who had been left in Bangkok, sent the news through the radio. Yang Chendong was also very happy when he heard the news. Siam Kingdom also sent a large army to their deaths. It was like someone giving him a pillow when he was sleepy. Pass down the order. Tian Hu and the others are to come to the main tent for a meeting. The main force of Siam Kingdom's army was finally sent out. This gave Yang Qindong the opportunity to defeat them one by one. This was also one of his plans. Otherwise, with the 800,000 Siam Kingdom's army gathered together, Yang Xie's army might not have the strength to do so. Yang Qindong called Tian Hu and the others over and informed them of the Siamese army's movements. Yang Qindong then asked them to change their tactics. Since there were so many enemies, they would not play a game of 2,000 against 2,000. But to say 100,000 against 100,000 was not Yang Qindong's intention. The so-called excellent commanders on the battlefield had to think of ways to take the initiative and then guide the situation of the battlefield to develop as they wished. Yang Qindong was undoubtedly an excellent commander, so he made the decision to change the battle from 2,000 to 5,000 people. At the same time, he also made a tactical decision to retreat when necessary, lure the enemy to chase and then force the enemy to split up. To put it bluntly, if the enemy's forces were relatively concentrated, then retreat. There was no rush to fight the enemy. When the enemy began to split up, then look for an opportunity to fight. It was like eating rice one bite at a time. The tactical plan was decided and the next step was to execute it. There were still some days before the main force of Siam Kingdom's reinforcements arrived. This was the time the five-star army had to prepare. It could be said that there was plenty of time. It had been more than 2 months since the battle with Siam Kingdom, and this was one of the few times Yang Qindong fought a battle. Looking at the past, Yang Qindong preferred to use the method of cutting the Gordian knot when destroying a force or a country. For example, when he attacked North Korea, he did it in a spurt of energy and did not give the enemy any time to react. When he attacked the Phnom Penh dynasty, which was now Cambodia, it only took him 31 days from the first shot to the end. The reason for this result was that 1. He was well prepared and 2. He had sufficient military strength. But this time the well-prepared side was Siam. They first made all the plans, then they began the attack with 800,000 soldiers. They caught Yang Xie off guard, and the time limit of the battle was constantly extended. Fortunately, Yang Qindong finally controlled the rhythm of the battle. Next, it was time to watch the performance of the five-star army. Siam Kingdom's reinforcements began to appear on the battlefield. First, they gathered in the eastern border city of Siam Kingdom. Then, in an echelon of 50,000 soldiers, a total of 550,000 soldiers went out of the city and pressed against the five-star army. The five-star army, which had been prepared for a long time, immediately began to withdraw their forces. They kept retreating, showing that they did not dare to fight. In order to attract the enemy's attention and find a suitable opportunity to attack, they retreated back to Cambodia. In the beginning, some people were worried that if they retreated from Siam Kingdom, the Siam Kingdom's army of 250,000 soldiers would continue to pursue them. In the face of such worries, Yang Qindong gave a very positive answer. A greedy person would never be satisfied. Look, the Siam Kingdom would not stop advancing because of their retreat. After all, they were the ones who launched the first attack. Their intention to expand was very clear. The fact was as Yang Qindong expected. When the five-star army retreated from Siam Kingdom and returned to Bob, the border city of Cambodia, the Siam Kingdom's army crossed the border and chased after them. Obviously, the arrival of the 200,000 reinforcements boosted the morale of some people. They wanted to make a big contribution. Chapter 1045. Since that was the case, Yang Qindong had no choice but to fulfill their wish. In order to inflict heavy damage to the Siamese army, Yang Qindong made 2 decisions. First, lure the enemy deep into their territory. Second, strengthen the defense and clear the field. He wanted to lure the greedy Siamese army into his territory and then look for an opportunity to attack. At the same time, he would not leave anything useful for the enemy. He would force the enemy to transport food from a long distance and then attack them. When it came to strengthening the defense and clearing the field, the party carrying out the plan would have to pay a price. The loss would be to the benefit of the people. Fortunately, the Siamese army had previously passed through these towns and cities. Along the way they had burned, killed and looted. The people had already suffered a disaster and had nothing valuable in their hands. This made the strengthening of the defense and clearing of the field much easier. The 250,000 Siamese soldiers continued to march forward, singing songs of victory. They were arrogant as they passed through Bob, Siam, Angkor and other places. They followed the edge of the Tunnel Sai River into the depths of Cambodia. When the news reached Bangkok, King Ili Chi was very happy. He did not expect the seemingly powerful five-star army to be so weak. He was glad that he had listened to Hamad and sent a large number of reinforcements. Otherwise, he would have been intimidated by the 5-star army. Ilikwi was in a good mood. Even the people of Siam felt good about themselves. When the streets and alleys were filled with news of the victories of the frontline soldiers, the people were overjoyed. Some of them even went to the compound of the diplomatic mission to express their excitement. They tried to enter the compound and parade Madali and the others to the public. After all, this was the relay station of the Siamese ambassadors. The Siamese soldiers guarding this place would not allow ordinary people to enter. However, as more and more people gathered nearby, they finally could not withstand the pressure and sent someone to report to Hamad. When two armies were at war, they would not kill the ambassadors. Moreover, the Siamese army had not achieved the final victory. On the battlefield, the situation was ever-changing. If the ambassadors sent by the 5-star army were killed, the two sides would have to fight to the death. Seeing this, Hammond arrived outside the diplomatic mission's compound and brought 1,000 soldiers with him to protect the place. Logically speaking, this was the most normal action and even something within his duty. But when all of this fell into the eyes of the first-rank General Chun Hong, who had always wanted to cause trouble, he saw an opportunity. Under his instigation, news quickly spread through the streets of the royal capital. Prime Minister Hammond had long been on good terms with the 5-star army. This time, he even risked defending the citizens to ensure the safety of the 5-star army's emissary. There was no smoke without fire. Many untrue things were often controlled by rumors and eventually became facts in people's eyes. Hamad advocated for the use of a large number of reinforcements, which won the king's praise, especially his advocacy of large-scale operations, not giving the 5-star army a chance to defeat them one by one, which allowed the army to continuously occupy large areas of Cambodia. All of these were contributions, and they were the cause and effect of envy, jealousy, and hatred in the eyes of others. When one person's contributions were too great, it would attract the dissatisfaction of others. At this moment, Hammond was like this. Originally, as the Prime Minister, he was the leader of the officials. This time, with such a great contribution, it naturally caused others to feel a sense of hatred towards a common enemy. At this time, Chun Hong made his move. With him as the leader, the officials who were implicated collectively wrote a petition to impeach Hammond, saying that he had secretly colluded with the 5-star army's diplomatic mission and did not hesitate to mobilize the Siamese army to fight against the Siamese citizens. This was the greatest provocation to the imperial power. Ili Chi, who was able to lead Siam into the era of great cities, was not a foolish person. When he saw these memorials, he was not moved. Instead, he put them aside and walked towards the harem. In the harem, the most favored concubine, Chun Huang's sister, had already received the news. When she saw the king, she naturally fawned over him and served him well. She seemed to have noticed that Ilikwi's expression was not good, so she asked him about the reason. The king was also a human, and similarly he had his own happiness and worries. Some things were not suitable for him to tell his subordinates, so the person next to him became the target of his venting. Therefore he told the king about the impeachment of Hammond. His beloved concubine, who was already prepared, was not willing to let go of the opportunity to speak. She said, seemingly intentionally or unintentionally, "The king need not worry, the prime minister has done many things for the country. His contributions have already spread throughout the harem, and there are even people who say, when one stopped speaking it often had a different effect. For example, when his beloved concubine suddenly stopped speaking, it was rather suspenseful, and it successfully attracted Hammond's attention." What did people say? This I dare not say. Her face was filled with fear. It had to be said that her talent was wasted if she did not go into acting. "It's fine, I forgive you. Speak." The more she acted like this, the more Ilikwi wanted to know what was going on. Completely forced, his beloved concubine said, "My subordinate said that the prime minister's contributions are great. If not for him, Siam would be in danger. If not for him, Siam would have been defeated by the 5-star army. Such a person is definitely a wise man, a great contributor. Enough." Without waiting for his beloved concubine to finish speaking, Ilikwi's face was filled with anger. As a king, he was wary of his subordinates' incompetence and uselessness, but he was even more wary of his subordinates' abilities. Otherwise, why would there be a saying, "The most meritorious man is the town lord"? According to what his beloved concubine said, it seemed that Siam's achievements today were all due to Xianggua's efforts. Even he, the monarch, could not compare to him. How could this not anger Ilikwi, who had always been confident and had a strong sense of self-esteem? He had to admit that Hammond was very capable, so much so that he could entrust him with many things without worry. However, when he did everything well and even won a great reputation as the king, he had to worry about whether his subordinates' contributions were too great. Speaking of which, it was really difficult to be a subordinate. He could not do it, but he could not do it too well either. He really did not know what to do. His beloved concubine's words seemed to have nothing to say, but the words "the most meritorious man" had been deeply buried in Eliqui's heart. He was worried that some people's contributions were too great, so he had already planned to suppress them. However, Eliqui was indeed capable. He did not plan to deal with Hammond now. Instead, he wanted to wait until after the battle with the five-star army was over. This trip to the harem was nothing more than a thorn in his heart. Hammond was unaware of all this. He continued to conscientiously carry out his duties. Even though he knew that many people were impeaching him, he did not take it seriously. Everything was because he knew that Eliqui was a wise king. He would not doubt himself because of the words of others. Therefore he did what he should do and did not restrain himself. However, it was this confidence that brought him disaster. Yang Xie Foreign Minister Ma Dali, who knew the world's affairs without going out, was trapped in the compound and seemed to have no contact with the outside world. However, through a small radio station, the outside world could not be hidden from his eyes and ears. After receiving a telegram from the Intelligence Department's Southeast Branch, Yunk, and knowing what was happening outside, he found a Siamese person in charge of the matters here in the compound and requested to see the first-rank General Chun Hong. Chun Hong wanted to use this Yang Xie diplomatic mission to harm the Prime Minister. Naturally, he would try his best to bribe anyone in the compound. This person in charge was one of those bribed. This information was found out by Yunk and the others. Naturally, Ma Dali's request fell into Chun Huang's ears. When he first heard the news, Chun Hong did not understand Ma Dali's intentions. However, the more it was so, the more he felt that this meeting was necessary. He immediately decided to meet with Ma Dali. Thus, under the arrangements of his subordinates and without alerting the Prime Minister, he entered the diplomatic compound to meet with Ma Dali. When they first met, Ma Dali lowered his status and even tried to flatter Chun Hong. At first he gave Chun Hong a good impression. The meeting was very pleasant. Ma Dali took the opportunity to speak according to the plan. The Siamese army is invincible. Although I have been trapped here for a long time, I have not received any news from the five-star army for a long time. Your king also has no intention of receiving us. I can imagine what will happen. In the interest of peace and friendship, he is willing to represent the five-star army and take the initiative to negotiate. He is even willing to give half of Cambodia to Siam. He just hopes that this war will end sooner. Ma Dali spoke with great sincerity. Chun Hong had no choice but to believe him. Since Ma Dali was here to show goodwill, this was a good thing. He was overjoyed and said, "Very good. Your esteemed envoy is able to see the situation clearly. You are indeed a smart person. However, I wonder if your words can represent the highest level of the five-star army?" "Of course. Otherwise, wouldn't my position as an envoy become a joke? In fact, I won't hide it from the great general. When I first came here this time, I wanted to negotiate with your country, but no one listened to me. Thus, I took the initiative to look for you. I know that you are a smart person. You will definitely agree to this mutually beneficial answer. So, as long as the general agrees, we can immediately do what we said. We, the five-star army, are willing to cede our territory to Siam for the sake of our reputation. We only ask that you hand General Tong over to us so that we can answer to the outside world." Chapter 1046. Ma Dali finally revealed his trump card, General Tong Si. This was something he had discussed with Yang Qindong beforehand. Their instincts told them that this person would be of great use. When Tong Si was mentioned, Ha Chunwang sucked in a breath of cold air. He knew that this person was already waiting for his death in the dungeon. However, no matter what, he was still a general of Siam. If he were to hand him over to the five-star army, what would the people outside say? He couldn't help but ask with some difficulty, "Esteemed ambassador, must you take Tong Si?" "Yes, we must. This concerns the reputation of our five-star army. Our leader said that we must see him alive or dead," Ma Dali said with an unquestionable tone. When he heard that, Ha Chunwang immediately had a plan in his mind. If they wanted to see the corpse, it would be easy. He could find a random excuse and say that it was Tong Si's corpse. Once the news spread and the people were dissatisfied, he could release Tong Si and let him face the truth. By then, the deal with the five-star army would have been completed. What could they do? Thinking about it, he nodded and agreed. All right, leave this matter to me. Esteemed ambassador, please wait for the good news. To be able to win this battle without shedding a drop of blood and seize a large portion of the territory, this was definitely a great contribution. With an excited heart, Ha Chunwang entered the palace and met with Yi Liqi. He told him everything that had happened. This discussion naturally caused Yi Liqi to be overjoyed. He only needed to hand over one person to obtain the final victory. This made him very happy. Especially when Ha Chunwang thought about how he could casually find a corpse to deal with and reap the benefits. He didn't need to take any responsibility and didn't lose the dignity of a great nation. After Ha Chunwang received the task, he immediately went to carry it out. He spent a lot of effort to get a tombstone and engrave Tong Si's name on it. After everything was settled, he personally went to the diplomatic mission's compound and invited Ma Dali, who had been trapped the moment he arrived, to the tombstone. He pointed at the tombstone and said, "This is Tong Si's tomb. To tell you the truth, he was defeated in the war. When he returned home, our king personally gave the order to execute him." Ma Dali sneered, then he said, "Great general, do you think that a tombstone can put an end to everything? I'm afraid there's no way to explain this." "You can open the coffin and examine the corpse," Ha Chunwang said on his behalf. "Forget it. This person has been dead for longer than I have been in Bangkok, and the weather is so hot. What else can there be other than the rancid smell after opening the coffin?" After Ma Dali finished speaking, he flicked his sleeves and left. His voice echoed in the air, "Great general, since this is the case, our five-star army will fight you on the battlefield even if we have to sacrifice ourselves." As a result, the peace talks were unable to proceed. Ha Chunwang was a little disappointed, but he returned to his daily routine. After all, there was still good news coming from the front line. Even if the peace talks failed, they would still win this battle. It was just that more people would die. Right now, his greatest desire was to get rid of Hammond. If this person was still the prime minister, he was afraid that after the war, he would have to return to the barren lands of the western frontier. This was something he could not bear. Hammond was not idle either. He had been busy recruiting new soldiers. Although there were always reports of victory coming from the front lines, there was no harm in making more preparations since the battlefield could change at any time. Under Hammond's supervision, the recruitment of new soldiers was carried out in an orderly manner. The impeachment memorials continued to be placed in front of Hammond. Although there was a thorn in his heart, this famous monarch had no intention of touching Hammond. He had already thought about it. Even if he wanted to touch Hammond, he would have to wait until the war ended. Everything would be settled with an excuse to suppress it. Using the dying Tong Si as a bargaining chip to end the war was quickly forgotten. It was as if it had never happened. The reason why no one paid attention to this matter was because they believed that the army was winning steadily. There was no need for such methods. However, as the Siamese army on the eastern front line occupied more and more empty cities and territories, they had no choice but to divide their forces to defend the cities. The Siamese army, which originally consisted of 50,000 people, finally showed signs of being scattered. Attack. The five-star army, who had been waiting for an opportunity, saw the effect of luring the enemy deep into the enemy's territory. They decisively launched a fierce counterattack. More new soldiers entered the battlefield. Apart from the corpses left on the battlefield, those who walked out were qualified soldiers who had experienced hundreds of battles. Yang Qindong's decision was to eliminate the enemy's strength. He did not care about the gains or losses of a single city or territory. Following this principle, the five-star army used multiple attacks to launch a full-scale counterattack against the 250,000 Siamese soldiers who had entered Cambodia. In order to achieve the goal of using war to train the soldiers, the young men from all over the country rushed in at once. They formed a unit of 5,000 people and launched a planned and intensive counterattack against the Siamese soldiers. After half a month, nearly 100,000 of the 300,000 people died. The number of injured reached 100,000. However, in the end, around 70,000 qualified soldiers were harvested. The attack of 300,000 people killed nearly 100,000 Siamese soldiers, greatly slowing down the enemy's offensive. Then the third batch of young men arrived. Another 200,000 people entered the battlefield. 10 days later, more than 50,000 people died and more than 100,000 were injured. The number of soldiers who had experienced hundreds of battles was 50,000. In the third battle, more than 80,000 people were killed or injured. The East Siamese army still had about 70,000 people. At this point, the lack of manpower had become obvious. They had completely lost the initiative on the battlefield. Urgent letters for help were sent to the capital, Mangu City. The five-star army of the East Siamese army had sent out about 560,000 new soldiers. Nearly 200,000 people died and more than 200,000 were injured. In the end, the number of qualified soldiers was 125,000. Perhaps they were not the best, especially the 50,000 people who came later. When they faced the Siamese army, their opponents were no longer at their peak. However, they had all experienced battles on the battlefield and had seen blood. They had a certain level of self-defense and killing ability. Give the order. 125,000 people will be divided into 13 units. We will launch a counterattack. We need better soldiers. Faced with hundreds of thousands of casualties, Yang Qindong said with a pained expression. However, they were of a different race. The deaths of these people were not as painful as the deaths of the 4,854 Lung Feng and Heiwei soldiers. With the order, the counterattack began. In the face of the veterans' counterattack, the Siamese army, which had been badly beaten, finally showed signs of weakness. Not only did they quickly abandon the captured cities, but even when they retreated back to the borders of Siam, the five-star army did not stop. They continued to attack them. Shatu City fell. The loss of Shatu City, an important city at the eastern border, meant that the Siamese army had changed from an all-out attack to an all-out retreat. It also meant that the five-star army had begun to gain the initiative on the battlefield. The loss of Shatu City caused an earthquake in Bangkok. When King Yi Liqui heard the news, he almost fainted. Then he summoned all the officials for a meeting. All the officials were woken up in the middle of the night and gathered in the palace. The news of the fall of Shatu City was personally reported by Yi Liqui. All the officials were terrified. All right, everyone is here. Let's talk about what to do next. At this moment, Yi Liqui's face no longer showed any signs of panic. However, it was undeniable that his expression was extremely ugly. Even with his ability to calm himself down, he was already panicking. If the king was like this, the other officials were even more so. Everyone was panicking and did not dare to raise their heads. The 250,000 soldiers were defeated just like that. Now there was less than a third of them left. Furthermore, the five-star army had entered the border. How could they turn the situation around? Seeing that no one was speaking, Yi Liqui could only ask, "Minister, how is the recruitment going?" "Your Majesty, the recruitment is still ongoing. Currently, there are 100,000 new soldiers entering the camp. However, they have not undergone any training. If they are forced onto the battlefield, I am afraid that most of them will not be able to withstand a single blow. They will not be of any use." Hammond raised his head and said hesitantly. He was really worried that the king would send out these 100,000 soldiers in a moment of desperation. If that was the case, it would be the same as sending these people to their deaths. Fortunately, Yi Liqui was not muddle-headed. He only shook his head and expressed his disappointment. If it was any other time, Yi Liqui's performance would have caused Chun Hong to jump out and kick Hammond while he was down. However, he lowered his head and remained silent. He suddenly thought of Ma Dali and what he had told him about General Tong. Previously, they had considered Siam's reputation and the fact that their army had always held the initiative on the battlefield. Hence, they did not agree to hand over the people. But now, in the face of such an unfavorable situation, he had no choice but to disregard his reputation. "Your Majesty, I have something to say. I don't know if I should say it." Seeing that the court had fallen into silence again, Chun Hong spoke up. It was rare for someone to take the initiative to speak at this time. The high and mighty Yi Liqui simply spat out a word, "Speak." After receiving permission, Chun Hong looked at the throne and said without blinking, "Your Majesty, do you still remember the envoy from the five-star army? He said that as long as we hand over General Tong, they will withdraw their troops and even compensate us. Of course, today is different from the past. Let's not think about compensation. However, if they can retreat, we will have enough time to train a new army and hope to rise again." Chapter 1047. Chun Hong had just opened his mouth when Prime Minister Hamad's voice rang out. "That's impossible. Tong Si is a general of Siam. If we hand him over just like that, where will our dignity go? If we do that, how will the people view us?" Hamad was a capable prime minister. Siam was able to enter the era of prosperity because of King Yi Li's wisdom. However, it had a lot to do with Hamad as the prime minister. Usually people like him were very proud. Now that someone wanted to trample on his pride, how could he agree? As if he had expected Hammond to object, Chun Hong quickly turned around and looked at him. What's wrong? Does the Prime Minister value his reputation so much? Is reputation more important or the strength and safety of Siam more important? Of course they're all important. Although the situation in the East isn't looking good, we still have 100,000 veterans. Under their lead, the 200,000 new recruits might be able to make a difference. Just like the 5-star army, aren't they also made up of new recruits? Hammond naturally wasn't afraid of anyone when it came to eloquence. Is that so? What if these 300,000 soldiers lose the war? Prime Minister, what will happen to Siam? Who will protect the safety of the royal city? Chun Hong wasn't a pushover either. He had already prepared for this problem. He had even prepared for what Hamad would say. In the court, the two ministers actually quarreled openly. This made Ely, who was already in a bad mood, even more unsightly. When the country was in danger, why couldn't these people sit down and talk calmly? Would there be a good ending to a quarrel between ministers? In a fit of anger, Ely immediately showed his might and said angrily, "Enough, this isn't a small street. You aren't the lowest class of commoners. Shut up." Since the king was angry, the two naturally ended their quarrel. They both took a few steps back and returned to their positions. At this time Ely's voice rang out. "Dignity is the foundation of a country. Of course we want it." Hamad heaved a sigh of relief. He was afraid that the king would believe Chun Chunwang's words. If that was the case, how could a dynasty without dignity and bottom line be trusted? Unfortunately, this relief didn't last for even a breath of time. Ely's voice rang out again. "But, for the safety of the country, so what if we bow our heads this time? Don't the Han people always say that a great man knows when to yield and when not? Then we will bow our heads this time. As long as it's for the sake of Siam's future. Let's leave this matter to the general. Go see the ambassador from the 5-star army and ask him if the previous promise is still valid." They all said, but, and there was nothing good after that. Now that it had been confirmed, Minister Hammond felt a chill in his heart as he urged, "Your Majesty, you mustn't open your mouth. Otherwise, the hearts of the people will truly be unable to unite. That would truly be the most terrifying thing. Enough." Without waiting for Hamad to finish speaking, Ely waved his hand and said, "Prime Minister, you should worry more about the new army. How to quickly let them have a certain amount of fighting power is far more practical than talking about righteousness in court." The Prime Minister was the Prime Minister of a country. He was an existence that was second only to the king and above tens of thousands. Many times, the Prime Minister or Prime Minister had a lot of control over the imperial power. They could even control the emperor, the king, the monarch, and everything that they could see. As the supreme leader of the imperial power, how could he be happy? It wasn't easy to conquer the country, but in the end, most of the power was given to the Prime Minister. What was the meaning of this? In the end, he was just a high-ranking employee. How could he dare to control the boss? Because of this, in the early days of the Great Ming Dynasty, Zhu Yuanzhang spent a lot of effort to abolish the Prime Minister system. In the end, he concentrated power on himself. Although his workload increased, he was still happy. The Great Ming Dynasty no longer had a Prime Minister system, but Siam still had one. Moreover, Hammond was indeed a very honest person. He had a lot of autonomy in certain matters, and even the king had to act according to his mood in certain matters. The reason for such a situation was none other than the fact that this person was very capable and could help him in many things. This made him willingly give up power for his own benefit. But now, Hamad's actions were very different from his own. It already involved the safety of the country. He finally couldn't bear it anymore. In addition, Chun Hong had contacted so many people to impeach Hamad. At this moment, all of his anger exploded and he told Ely to shut up. Ever since Siam became a powerful city, Ely Chi had never spoken to him so forcefully. At this moment, Hamad was stunned. He realized that he didn't completely understand the king. Chun Hong saw that Ely was deflated and was very happy. He immediately cupped his fist and said, "This subject obeys your Majesty's orders. Please listen to this subject's good news." Hamad was actually scolded in court. This was the first time this had happened. At this moment, the other courtiers who were originally flattering him began to deliberately distance themselves from him. Perhaps this was the true nature of human nature. There would always be more people who hit a man when he was down, and fewer people who helped him when he was down. Ely Chi walked out of the palace alone. Compared to his colleagues who took the initiative to distance themselves from him, This didn't make him sad. It was nothing more than showing him the cold and warm side of human nature. What really made him sad was the king's attitude and the other subjects' speechlessness. He couldn't imagine a country that didn't even have dignity. What kind of future could they talk about? Chun Hong, on the other hand, went to the diplomatic group's compound with a face full of joy. When he talked about Tong Si, Ma Dali's face was still filled with determination. That's right. As long as you hand over Tong Si for us to deal with, the 5-star army will retreat and discuss compensation with you. Esteemed envoy, you are too polite. What compensation? We are all neighboring countries, so we should get along well with each other. How about this? I will go ask His Majesty to bring Tong Si over for you to deal with. At this moment, Ha Chunwang didn't dare to talk about compensation. In his opinion, if the 5-star army could retreat immediately, he could accept some compensation. However, he didn't know that Ma Dali already knew that Tong Si had been taken away by the intelligence department. This promise was impossible to fulfill. Under such conditions he could say anything he wanted. Ha Chunwang met the king for the sake of profit. Soon he received a decree and went straight to the death row prison. Here he interrogated Tong Si, who was imprisoned and awaiting death. Then he was surprised to find that the person he saw wasn't Tong Si at all, but someone he had never seen before. What's going on? What's going on? Ha Chunwang roared as he called the jailer over and asked like a madman. I don't know. This person was sent here by the Prime Minister. As for who he is, we don't know. The jailer sold out the Prime Minister in order to cut ties. Hearing that it was all Hammond's doing, Chun Huang's face revealed a sinister expression. He turned around and went back to the palace. In the palace, Ili Chi had placed all his hopes on handing over Tong Si. Suddenly, Ha Chunwang reported that the person in the death row prison wasn't Tong Si, but someone else. Ili Chi immediately sat on the throne and was speechless for a long time. The situation had changed too quickly. It was so fast that he couldn't react in time. How did Tong Si disappear? Your Majesty, it must be Hammond's doing. I said before that this person is suspected of being in cahoots with the 5-star army. With this opportunity, Chun Hong obviously wanted to add insult to injury. This isn't possible. Ili Chi shook his head. He still didn't believe it. That was the Prime Minister he personally conferred. How could he betray him? Your Majesty, regardless of whether it is true or not, I will know once I capture him and interrogate him. However, the Prime Minister has always been very cunning. I'm afraid we won't be able to get anything out of him using normal methods. We can only be a little more ruthless. Your Majesty, please agree. Ha Chunwang clenched his teeth and said. Ili Chi had no choice but to agree. He understood Hammond very well. If this was really his doing, it would be impossible to calmly interrogate him about Tong Si's whereabouts. As such, he could only use some special methods. At the Prime Minister's residence, a group of Siamese soldiers suddenly appeared and took Hammond away without any warning. Ha Chunwang had never wanted to keep a low profile. He even wanted to use this matter to strike a blow. Many people saw the Prime Minister's prestige during the arrest. Not long after, a rumor spread through the streets that the Siamese army had admitted defeat to the 5-star army. They had decided to compromise and betray their dignity by giving their general Tong Si to the 5-star army to curry favor. It was precisely because the Prime Minister did not agree with this suggestion that he was captured. The news was naturally spread by Qingzi, a CIA intelligence agent who had been staying in the city. All of this was Yang Qindong's orders. In his opinion, there was no crisis that had a greater impact than a civil strife. Wasn't it said that even the strongest fortress was afraid of being breached from the inside? Hammond's arrest naturally caused chaos in the royal capital. When Ili Chi learned of this matter, he couldn't help but fly into a rage. He hated Ha Chunwang for not knowing his limits. Why did he have to be so brazen when arresting someone? He hated those who spread the news. Wasn't this destroying his own foundation? Chapter 1048. However, everything was already a fact. Since his request for the 5-star army to negotiate had already been made public, there was no need for him to hide anymore. He just needed to find Tong Si and hand him over to resolve this crisis. Speaking of Yi Liqui, he had underestimated the position of the Prime Minister in the hearts of the people. This Prime Minister had the reputation of loving the people like his own children. In addition, with the CIA secretly adding fuel to the fire, it didn't take long before voices of support for Hamad appeared in Bangkok. These voices grew louder and louder. There were even groups of people who went to the various government offices and the palace to petition. The general idea was that they refused to lower their heads and wanted the prime minister to be returned to them. The sudden appearance of this unexpected wave and the number of people who participated increased. Eliqui was finally a little afraid. He wasn't afraid that the people would do anything to threaten him. In his view, as long as he mobilized the army, the people were in existence that could be suppressed at will. He was afraid that the prime minister's influence was so great. Fortunately, he had been captured. If he had waited for the prime minister to make the first move, with this person's rallying power, it would be hard to say if he would be able to keep his throne. The people's petition not only failed to save the prime minister, but it also made the king even more worried. There was no other way. It was always a taboo for the king to be too powerful. It could be seen that even if Hamad survived this crisis, he wouldn't be put in an important position after he was released. On the front line of the East Army, Yang Qindong led the Lu 5th Division, the 1st Cavalry Division, and the 1st Cavalry Division of the new army. They slowly followed behind the hundreds of thousands of veterans. Step by step, they moved towards the inner borders of Siam and towards Bangkok. Siam wasn't like the other countries and regions that had been conquered before. It was at the peak of the era of big cities. Whether it was the morale of the army or the people, it could be used greatly. It truly had the foundation to contend against the 5-star army. If Yang Qindong had not changed his strategy at the critical moment, it would have been difficult for him to defeat the Siamese army, which was large in number and high in morale. Even now, after the war, Yang Qindong had hundreds of thousands of veterans under his command. However, he still dared not say that he could conquer Siam like he did with the other countries. After all, the hearts of the people were leaning towards benefits. This could be seen from the way the people looked at the army wherever they went. Regarding this, Yang Qindong felt wronged. So, it's natural for the Siamese army to attack Cambodia. Is it an invasion when we retaliate? Why is there always a double standard? Faced with the resistance of the local people, any other person would have to consider whether to sit down and negotiate for benefits. Just like the Japanese army that invaded China, when faced with the resistance of the Chinese people, they could only use the slogan of mutual prosperity to manage the situation. They would never dare to use force to suppress the Chinese people. However, when it came to Yang Qindong, he had already made up his mind. He remembered the words of a great man: "You should chase after the enemy with courage. Don't learn from the overlord for the sake of fame." The Siamese army could suddenly attack this time. If they let it go, who could guarantee that they would not attack again? He was no longer the one nation of the past. He had already occupied several provinces, especially the newly built Far Eastern province. It was a vast land with abundant resources, and it needed a large number of people to fill it. At most, he could just emigrate the people there. In short, this time he was ready to destroy Siam, even if he had to pay a high price for it. He had already ordered the governor of Chigang City, as well as the other provinces, to immediately prepare for the migration of the people. In fact, Cambodia, as the nearest province, had already done so. Every time the 5-star army occupied a city or a place, they would arrange for these people to settle down there. As for the natives who were originally here, they would be taken away and sent to other provinces and places like the Far Eastern continent on ships. Yang Qindong's plan was to nibble away at Siam, step by step, including every inch of land and every single person in the country. Because of this, the speed of the army was very slow. Even so, it was already October, and the army led by Yang Qindong was less than 300 miles away from Bangkok. More than half a year had passed. This war could be said to be long. It took at least 31 days to defeat the Phnom Penh dynasty and conquer it. In the matter of Siam, he was determined to put in a lot of effort. Manpower, material resources, and financial resources had also been paid correspondingly. The direct result was that Lord Yu Qian and the other provincial heads couldn't help but complain. Fortunately, Yang Qindong said that there would be no move to destroy the country in a short time, and they would be given some time to develop, which blocked the leisurely mouths of the masses. In the end, the lack of population and the lack of resources was a big problem. Yang Xie's development time was too short, and the speed of expanding the territory was too fast. This was the so-called pain and happiness. Compared to the 5-star army, the nobles in Bangkok had long been in a mess. The loss of the peripheral towns one after another was like a giant beast opening its mouth, giving them a gloomy and terrifying feeling. No one liked war. Even if there were some who liked it due to various reasons, they definitely did not like the feeling of being attacked at their doorstep. Facing the defeat of the East Army, especially the news from the North Army, Even though the commander there was Siam's rank 1 General Gordon, who was also the best at fighting, it was useless. In the face of the endless stream of men under Yang Xie's influence, their military strength was no longer at an advantage. On the contrary, they were at a disadvantage. In such an environment, no one could hold on for too long. In the palace, Siam's King Li Qi was finally impatient. He called Chen Hong over and asked, "He still hasn't told us where he hid Tong Si?" "No, he only said that he doesn't know." Chen Hong carefully raised his head. There was no other way. He was a little guilty. Originally, he thought that after capturing Hammond he would only need to use a few tricks to get him to confess everything. However, there would always be someone who was stubborn, and he happened to meet him. 20 days had already passed and there was still no progress. He didn't even get a single word of confession. All he got was the contemptuous sneer in the other party's eyes. Hearing that Xianggui still hadn't confessed anything, King Li Qi said angrily, "What does he want? Does he want to see Siam destroyed?" "Your Majesty." Chen Hong comforted the king when he saw how angry the king was. At the same time, he suggested in a low voice, "Your Majesty, it seems like it's impossible for him to say anything. Should we make other preparations?" "Other preparations? Let's hear them." Knowing that there was a hidden meaning in his words, Li Qi looked like he wanted to try. Ahem. Chen Hong coughed lightly to show his awkwardness. He then said, "Why don't we find someone who looks like Tong Si and hand him over to the 5-star army? Maybe we can get away with it." "An imposter?" When he saw Chen Huang's unnatural expression, Li Qi knew that Chen Hong wouldn't have any good ideas. Now that he heard this, his face showed an expression of as expected. If it was in the past, he definitely wouldn't have agreed. But now he was speechless. Should he reprimand her? Indeed, this move was quite despicable, especially when it involved the war between two countries. It was even more of a joke. If it was in the past, he would never have used it. But what should he do now? Seeing that the 5-star army was winning every step of the way, Siam's crisis was getting bigger and bigger. If they didn't think of a solution soon, they might really be in danger of being destroyed. At such a time of crisis, all kinds of tricks could be used. "How confident are you?" Instead of objecting, he asked about the feasibility of the matter. Chen Hong raised his head in surprise. When he saw Li Qi's serious face, he knew that there was a chance of success. He immediately replied, "It shouldn't be difficult to find someone who looks like Tong Si. It's just like how we look at the Han people. I think they look the same to us. So, I'm 70% confident." 70% is not low. Li Qi pondered for a moment and said. Then, as if he thought of something, he said, "Do it carefully. If it doesn't work, remember that it's your own problem. It has nothing to do with me or Siam." Yes. Chen Hong nodded repeatedly. This result was already within his expectations, but he didn't find it strange. It was not because of other reasons. This was originally a very dirty matter. If something really went wrong, someone had to be the scapegoat. Chen Hong left. He had already found a replacement. After promising Li Qi's family a lot of benefits, he deliberately made him look very disheveled. This was to make people not want to see him. This would increase the probability of success. After everything was done, Chen Hong appeared in the diplomatic mission's courtyard. Tong Si was brought in. When Ma Dali heard the news, he was shocked at first. Then he laughed softly. He had already thought of Siam's plan. After all, if he were to put himself in their shoes, this might be the only solution. He pretended to be very happy as he walked out of the room. Then he saw Chen Hong close by with a flattering smile on his face. Speaking of which, this person wasn't like this a month ago. Following the 5-star army's successive victories in the war, this person's noble head finally lowered. Ma Dali, who was well aware of all this, maintained his usual smile. He still needed Chen Hong to put on a show. He couldn't ruin their relationship. Chapter 1049. General Chen is here. My apologies for not going out to meet you. Ma Dali pretended to be very happy and took the initiative to greet him. Chen Hong was also full of smiles. When he saw Ma Dali, he pretended to be mysterious and said, "Minister Ma, look who I have brought." This was the first time Chen Hong had addressed Ma Dali by his official position. Just from this point alone, it was clear that their intelligence department had done something. Ma Dali himself was not surprised by this title. From the day he entered Bangkok, he had already disregarded his life and death. With the 5-star army's continuous victories, He knew that he would not die unless the higher-ups of Siam had lost their minds. Unless they wanted to die together with him, saving his life was equivalent to saving their lives. "Oh, I wonder what good news General Chun has brought?" Ma Dali asked without changing his expression. Chun Hong secretly admired Ma Dali's ability to maintain his composure. He went straight to the point. "Come, bring him here." "He is Tongsi?" "Yes. He is indeed tall and mighty." "Aha, General Chun is very considerate. I will immediately send someone to report this matter to the higher-ups. If there are no accidents, the war should stop now." After the fake Tongsi was brought out, there was a simple conversation. Then Ma Dali made a promise. Chun Hong was naturally overjoyed. While nodding, he almost urged Ma Dali to write a letter quickly. Ma Dali was a man of his word. He quickly wrote a letter and handed it to his trusted subordinates. Under the protection of Chun Huang's men, he left the city. 4 days later, the news of a ceasefire came from the front line. This caused all the officials and nobles in Bangkok to celebrate. The war was finally going to stop. They did not have to worry about their lives and the safety of their property. How could they know that the reason why the five-star army had stopped their attack was because they were preparing for the next step of the attack? Ma Dali had already sent a telegram to inform the higher-ups of the situation. Fortunately, he brought enough spare batteries with him when he went out this time. Otherwise, he might not be able to hold on with such frequent power supply. Yang Qindong knew that the other party had used impersonation to create a fake General Tong, so he decided to beat them at their own game. He wanted to use this to weaken the morale of Siam's resistance. Compared to their previous opponents, Siam could only be described as powerful. At the very least, this country had just passed the period of being a major city. It was the time when the country was strong and the people were rich. The people were very confident in the country. This would definitely increase the difficulty of their attack. It wasn't impossible to use brute force to suppress them, but it would come at a great price. On the other hand, if they could make the other party self-destruct, then the effect would be much better. Impersonating Tong Si was one of the methods to disintegrate the enemy. Yang Qindong had already thought about how to make use of this matter. However, he was 300 miles away and many things were beyond his reach. Everything depended on the cooperation between Ma Dali and the CIA. As for himself, this was a good opportunity to reorganize the military's morale and prepare for a bigger war. Being able to defeat Siam was completely different from dealing with other small countries in the past. In the past, the strategy was to gather the elite forces and force a breakthrough, catching the other party off guard. Then the main force would charge straight in. Before the other party could react, everything would be over. In the battle with Siam, they were the ones who took the initiative. They were in a passive position. In addition, the other party was already prepared. It was impossible to use the old strategy. That was why the war lasted for such a long time. Roughly calculating, Yang Xie's side had invested millions of new recruits in the north and east. The number of people who invested in the use of resources was even more, reaching more than 2 million. It was really not easy to achieve the current success with such a large amount of manpower and financial resources. However, this was not the end. If they blindly used brute force against Siam, who knew how much money and how many lives they would have to sacrifice to establish a complete victory here? After thinking about it, it was better to use the method of internal disintegration. The war supplies at the rear were continuously transported from Cheng City to Cambodia. Then they were transported by the people all the way to the army. There were dozens of carriages of ammunition. After more than 2 months of rest, the Lu 5th Division was ready to show their strong side again. The immigrants sent by the provinces were also in place. There were more than 1 million people. Now they were only waiting for Yang Qindong to give the order to launch the final attack. When the signal of internal strife came from Bangkok, it was time for them to march forward and conquer Bangkok in one fell swoop. It was time to end Yaliki's rule, the capital of Siam. The battle at the front had finally stopped. It was as if a boulder had been lifted from their chests. Everyone could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. As the chief contributor, Ha Chuan Wang's face was full of joy. He had received accurate information from King Yaliki. From now on he did not need to go to Shijiang. When the war was over, he could stay in the capital and enjoy life. This was the result he had been searching for. Naturally, he was overjoyed. His face was full of joy. When he heard that Minister Ma Dali wanted to see him, he did not dare to be negligent. He would not forget the reason why he was valued by the king. Ma Dali was a god that he could not afford to offend. In the diplomatic mission's courtyard, Chun Hong hurried over. When he saw Madali, he heard a question that made him feel awkward, but he couldn't avoid it. It was the other party's suggestion to escort Tong Si out of the royal capital and send him to the front lines of the Five-Star Army. He also said that this was the will of the Five-Star Army. Only then the Five-Star Army would sit down and negotiate. General Chun, this is the will of the higher-ups. I have to obey. Of course I'll stay behind. If nothing unexpected happens, I'll still be in charge of the peace talks. With our relationship, I'll do my best to take care of you. Ma Dali acted as if he didn't want to, but he had no choice. He even spoke in a comforting tone. Chun Hong understood Ma Dali's words. He also understood that this was a way for the Five-Star Army to show off their victory. However, since things had come to this, he could not refuse or stop it. Although doing so would greatly affect the morale of the Siamese soldiers, if he did not do so, would he really have to fight to the death against the aggressive Five-Star Army? I understand Minister Ma's intention. However, this is a serious matter. We need the king's permission. Chun Hong thought for a moment before giving an answer. Yes, but it must be fast. The higher-ups said that if they do not see Tong in person within 5 days, the attack will continue. By then, even I will be helpless. Ma Dali did not care whether Chun Hong was trying to delay or not. He expressed his attitude first. When he heard that there were only 5 days, Chun Hong became anxious. Minister Ma, the distance from here to your camp is 300 miles. 5 days? It's okay. The Five-Star Army will be there to welcome you. When the time comes, I will need your help. Ma Dali was prepared for this. Chun Hong could not do anything. He could only say that he would immediately explain the situation to the king and give him an answer. After leaving the courtyard, he went to the palace. When the king heard about this, he did not say anything. After a moment of silence, he stood up and left his seat. Not saying anything often represented a kind of tacit agreement. After Chun Hong received the order, he returned to the courtyard to express the king's agreement. In order to send Tong to the Five-Star Army's camp on time, he even urged Ma Dali to send Tong out of the city at night. It was not far from dark. Chun Huang's plan was to send Tong out of the city at night so that the impact would be minimized. Ma Dali would not let him do as he wished. He said that it was getting late and he needed to rest. He would arrange for people to leave the city the next morning. At this time, Ma Dali was obviously the winner. Since he said so, regardless of whether Chun Hong liked it or not, he could only accept it. Fortunately, he had one night to prepare. He had already decided to seal off the streets the next morning. In short, he would not allow anyone to see this scene that represented the shame of Siam. He had a good idea. When he was about to leave, Ma Dali broke his dream. "Oh right, General Chun, our leader said that when we send Tong out of the city we must make some noise. The Five-Star Army cares about our reputation. You started this war. If you do something wrong you have to admit it." Okay. Chun Hong felt bitter but he had to agree. After leaving the compound, he immediately sent people to transfer over a large number of soldiers to guard the streets. In short, it was to avoid any trouble as much as possible. Some things could not be changed by one's will. Yang Chendong had already planned this. When Tong Si was taken away from the dungeon, some things had already been decided. How could there not be any trouble? If that was the case, how could the morale of the soldiers and the people be affected? The next morning, Chun Hong came to the courtyard. It was obvious that his eyes were red. It was obvious that he had not slept the whole night. Ma Dali did not point it out. Instead, he took out the prison carriage that he had prepared. It was a carriage made of wood and the fake Tong was locked in it. Furthermore, it was cleaned up very neatly. Not only was the dirt and dust on his face washed clean, but he was also dressed in armor and dressed like a general. Looking at this scene, Chun Hong did not know why, but he had an ominous feeling. However, since things had come to this, he could only bite the bullet. He only hoped that the people did not know what was going on. Even if they knew, they would not care. Reality slapped him in the face again. The CIA had spread the news early in the morning that Siam had admitted defeat. In order to appease the anger of the Five-Star Army, they took the initiative to send General Tong to the enemy to show their sincerity. Chapter 1050. The people of Siam were very proud. They felt superior when they saw other people. They had never suffered such humiliation before. Therefore, many people came to the diplomatic mission compound in the morning. They wanted to prove that the rumors were false. They wanted to prove that their country was still strong and dignified. However, when the prisoner carriage came out of the compound, all their hopes were dashed. They saw a man in heavy armor standing in the carriage and parading through the streets. On his neck were the words "Guilty General Tong Si" written in Siamese. This was a blatant slap in the face. All the Siamese who saw this scene clenched their fists tightly to express their unwillingness to accept this. They felt humiliated by their country's humiliation. At this moment, their patriotism began to crumble. Some people could not help but curse. Ma Dali, who was accompanying them, wanted this effect. He glanced at Chun Hong and saw that his expression was ugly. He sneered in his heart. This is just the beginning. There will be more exciting things later. Chun Hong did not know what Ma Dali was thinking. He only hoped that the convoy would leave the city as soon as possible. Then he would bring Ma Dali back to the diplomatic compound to discuss the details of the peace talks. He was even thinking about how to appease the people, how to restore the prestige of the country, and how to unite the people. Suddenly, a loud shout broke his train of thought. A man in a servant's uniform suddenly broke through the guards and rushed to the prison wagon, shouting for his master. The Siamese soldiers in charge of guarding the carriage did not have time to react. Then, something unexpected happened. The servant cried out loud, then looked at the prisoner and said, "No. You are not our general. You are not General Tong Si." The first sentence was not very clear, but the second sentence explained everything clearly. Tong Si was a fake. Stop him. Chun Hong, who had a guilty conscience, widened his eyes and cursed in his heart. He hoped that nothing would happen, but something still happened. Ma Dali, who had been waiting for this moment, asked with a dark expression, "What's going on? General Chun, shouldn't you give us an explanation?" Facing Ma Dali's questioning gaze, Ha Chun Wang naturally had to deny it. He immediately said in a very firm tone, "It must be a misunderstanding, it must be a misunderstanding. How about this, leave it to me." Chun Hong had to do something. Otherwise things would really be messed up. If that really happened, the king might even kill him. After making a promise, Chun Hong rode out from the group and came to the prisoner's carriage. He first yelled at the servant and ordered him to be taken away. At the same time he said to the surrounding people who were watching the show, "This is General Tong. He attacked our good friend, the 5-star army, without permission. He was punished according to the law. All right, the matter has been clarified. Everyone don't crowd around here. Go do whatever you need to do." Previously, the rumors that Tong Si had been convicted were all hearsay. Although he was now in the prison van, it was still a mystery as to why he had been arrested. Now that Chun Hong had taken the initiative to explain himself, this was equivalent to an official response. Immediately, the surrounding commoners were unhappy. Tong was the person who had once killed the leader of the 5-star army. At that time, this incident was widely publicized in the royal city. Now that he had lost the battle, he was thrown out as a scapegoat to express goodwill to his former enemy. This kind of government, this kind of country was really disappointing. What? Didn't General Tong Si attack under the king's order? Yes, otherwise how could a general take away hundreds of thousands of troops without a decree? This doesn't make sense. Yes, we need a reasonable explanation. General Tong Si is innocent. We shouldn't bow down to the 5-star army. Siam is the most powerful country in the world. All kinds of shouts were different, but the meaning was very similar. It could be seen that the people were still very emotional. There were also some patriots among them. This was the foundation of Siam when it was a big city. With such outstanding people, as long as they didn't do anything that angered the heavens, what couldn't they do? Unfortunately, his good hand was ruined by Chun Hong and the others. If Hamad still had the final say, this wouldn't have happened. This was the role of a person in a powerful country. Otherwise, how could a sheep leading a herd of lions defeat a herd of sheep led by a lion? Alright, this is an order. If anyone dares to question it, they will be arrested and severely punished. Chun Hong, who didn't want to complicate matters, was angry and showed a fierce expression. This fierce expression naturally had an effect on the ordinary people. Immediately many people shut their mouths. Anyone could see that if they said anything inappropriate at this time, there was a possibility of them being arrested. That would be too unfair. But not everyone was afraid of Chun Hong. For example, Ma Dali, who was prepared, saw that the voices of the people were about to be suppressed and knew that it was time for him to stand up. He sneered in his heart and rode forward. "General Chun, I have a question. Please bring that servant over. I have something to ask." Seeing that it was Ma Dali, Chun Hong immediately smiled and said, "Minister Ma, you don't have to worry about such a small matter. I can handle it." "It's not a problem of whether you can handle it or not. I know that you intend to protect General Tong Si. In such a mood, perhaps you can really get a fake person to fool us. Therefore, we have to verify the person's identity. Otherwise, we will become the joke of the five-star army, Ma Dali said seriously. The five-star army was now waiting for Tong Si's arrival, and time was limited. If Chun Hong couldn't convince Ma Dali, he couldn't be sent to the five-star army. The war had to continue, and Chun Hong couldn't bear such a big responsibility. Helplessly, he waved his hand and asked the servant who was about to be brought back. When the servant was brought back, he looked at Ma Dali in horror. Then Ma Dali said, "What did you say just now? You said that this isn't General Tong Si, right?" "I might have seen wrongly." The servant seemed to know that he had made a big mistake. At this moment his voice was trembling. "Don't be afraid. Just tell the truth. I can guarantee that if you tell the truth, no one will make things difficult for you. Not only that, I will also keep you by my side to protect your safety. How about it? Can you tell the truth this time?" Ma Dali made a promise in front of everyone. Ma Dali's intention to protect him was very sincere. At this moment, the servant seemed to have let go of all his worries. First, he raised his head and looked at the person on the prisoner's carriage. Then he pointed at the person and said, "I'm General Tong's servant. Of course I recognize our general. However, this person is really not our general." "Are you sure?" Ma Dali suddenly raised his voice. "I'm sure." The servant also said with a look of desperation. Perhaps he also knew that his life and safety had fallen into Ma Dali's hands. If he didn't tell the truth, only death would await him. He had no other choice. "Umph." Ma Dali's cold snort reached Chun Huang's ears. His face immediately turned ugly. "General Chun, I think I need an explanation." "Explain your numbness." Chun Hong really wanted to say this, but he didn't dare. Right now he was at Ma Dali's mercy. What could he say when he was at a disadvantage? Fortunately, his reaction was fast enough. He quickly raised the horsewhip in his hand and lashed out at a guard beside him. He shouted, "Speak. Who gave you the courage to give this general a fake to fool me and the noble envoy? Did you eat a bear's heart or a leopard's gall?" All right, the scapegoat had been randomly picked. The matter was resolved immediately. Ma Dali and the others returned to the diplomatic mission's courtyard. At the same time, the servant from Tong's residence also returned with them. Presumably with this person around, Chun Hong couldn't find a random person to fool him. Chun Hong went to the palace with a constipated expression. He didn't know what to do now that he had messed up his mission. However, the expected thunderous rage didn't happen. Perhaps the king also knew that after locking Xianghua in the dungeon and torturing him, he had no choice but to continue using this general. Furthermore, he knew about this matter. There was no way that he was being lied to. Post a notice and put Tong on the wanted list. Search every place and person related to Xianghua. Reward him heavily. I don't believe that a living person can fly to the sky, right? Ili Chi had dug into a dead end and directly linked Tong Si's disappearance to Prime Minister Hammond. Reality proved that if the method wasn't correct, the results wouldn't be correct. 5 days passed quickly. Under Yang Qindong's premeditated plan, the army continued to advancing towards Bangkok. Along the way, the foreign soldiers who had been baptized in the battlefield went through fierce battles again and again. After 150,000 casualties, there were only 100,000 left. However, these 100,000 soldiers definitely had the combat strength of a B-grade army. Another 20,000 soldiers were sacrificed in exchange for the defeat of the Siamese East Army. Of the original 250,000 soldiers, apart from those who were killed or captured, 20,000 managed to escape back to Bangkok. Behind them was the main force of Yang Qindong's five-star army, which consisted of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. The victory of the North Army was finally decided. Under the command of the Second Army Luo Pe, the public security chief Long Tainan, and the Lao general He Guang, they engaged in a huge battle with the Siamese army's General Godin. Chapter 1051. Gordon lived up to his name as a general of the Siam army. Not only was he brave, but he was also good at commanding. At one point he brought a lot of pressure and threat to the five-star army. However, just when both sides were evenly matched, Second Master Lu and Sixth Master Lu, the two firearm engineers, made their move. The cannons opened up a path and the muskets attacked. Once again they showed the world the difference between muskets and cold weapons. Faced with the sudden attack of the two elite Cold Vanguard Division, Gordon could do nothing but watch helplessly as they stabbed at him like two sharp knives. However, he didn't choose to run away like the other generals who were enemies of the five-star army. Instead, he chose to sacrifice himself on the battlefield. He led his personal soldiers to charge at the Cold Vanguard Division. In the end, his blood was spilled on the battlefield, and he truly fulfilled the saying that generals should die on the battlefield. When the news of Prime Minister Hammond being imprisoned came, perhaps Gordon knew that he had no way out. If he lost the battle and returned to the capital with the jealousy of Chun Hong, he might not have a good ending. He might even implicate his family. Since that was the case, he might as well die on the battlefield. At least he could preserve his reputation and protect his family. Gordon shed blood on the battlefield and died heroically for his country. Once the news spread, the North Army was in chaos. Without a commander, they could only retreat in the face of the five-star army. Not long after, Chiang Mai and Dong Chi were conquered. In the end, only 50,000 of the 300,000 soldiers escaped back to Bangkok. While the East and North launched a fierce counterattack, the two divisions of the First Sea Army in the south re-surrounded the important city of Pattaya. With the help of artillery, they quickly breached the city. The second-ranked general of the Siamese army, Nayu, died in battle. The other second-ranked general, Mengwa, fled back to Bangkok with 10,000 soldiers. At this point, the capital was in an awkward situation of being surrounded on three sides. In Bangkok, 80,000 defeated soldiers gathered. In addition to the original 100,000 elites and 200,000 new recruits, there were close to 400,000 soldiers. Just in terms of numbers, they exceeded the five-star army's 250,000 soldiers. The East Army had 125,000 soldiers, the North Army had close to 100,000, and the South Army had less than 20,000. The Siamese army only had a numerical advantage. In terms of morale, the Siamese army was a mess. Actually, when Chun Hong betrayed Tong Si and asked for peace with the five-star army, the morale of the army and the people had already started to crumble. The pitiful king of Italy didn't think about how to salvage the situation. Instead, he offered a huge reward and made it so that everyone knew about it. This only accelerated the time and process of their defeat. If one's heart was broken, it would be useless no matter how much effort they put in. Siam, which was originally a powerful country, went from glory to destruction in just half a year. Siam's territory was too small, and there was limited space to maneuver. Another reason was that the five-star army strategy was correct. After discovering the strength of the opponent, Yang Chendong naturally changed his strategy. Using battle to nurture the army was undoubtedly the right move. Then he grabbed hold of the opponent's weakness and used a person who had been forgotten by the opponent to attack the opponent, thus causing the opponent to lose the morale of the army. Now, it seemed that it was also an excellent move. Of course, having a pig like Chun Hong as an opponent would also help things progress smoothly. Siam capital, Bangkok. The 8 gates that led to the outside world were all closed. The outer and inner city gates were filled with Siam soldiers. From afar it was a patch of black. However, when one got closer, it was not hard to see the worry in their eyes. Siam had 800,000 regular soldiers and 200,000 reserve soldiers. However, in just over half a year, more than half of them had been killed or injured. There were only less than 400,000 soldiers left. One could imagine how they would feel if they were to go deep into the enemy's territory. Ha Chun Wang was once again entrusted with a heavy responsibility. He became the great general of the city defense, and Meng Hua, who had escaped from the south, became the deputy general of the city defense. The two of them commanded an army of 380,000, but there was not the slightest bit of joy on their faces. "General Meng, what do you think?" On top of the city wall, Ha Chun Wang, who was dressed in heavy armor, looked down at the five-star army. His eyes couldn't help but twitch. He had a feeling that if the other party really decided to attack the city, with those advanced cannons and guns, they wouldn't be able to stop them. Meng Hua was a standard 7 feet tall man. He also had a certain level of talent in leading troops. Unfortunately, he was born at the wrong time. How could his sword be a match for cannons and guns? Now that he was asked by Ha Chun Wang, he only hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. He spat out 3 words with difficulty: "We can't defend it." "That's right, we can't defend it. Although there are 380,000 soldiers in the city, there are still 600,000 civilians. The daily expenditure is huge. Now that the people are in chaos, once the siege starts, no one knows what will happen. Since that is the case, why don't we negotiate while we still have the strength?" He seemed to be talking to himself but also seemed to be talking to Meng Hua. In short, he was not prepared to continue fighting. He was prepared to negotiate, and he hoped that Meng Hua would take the initiative to take on this task. Meng was a smart man. Apart from his own efforts, there was also a benefactor who appreciated him. That was the captured Prime Minister Hammond. Now that the benefactor was in trouble, it was already a miracle that he was not implicated. How could he still dare to bargain? This general is willing to cooperate with the great general's orders. Ah, good. I didn't misjudge you. Then I'll leave the task of negotiating outside the city to you. Of course, I will also negotiate with the 5-Star Army's diplomatic group inside the city. Let's work together to turn the tide. What do you think? Seeing Meng was so sincere, Chun Hong was naturally happy. Amidst his happiness, the twitching of the corner of his eyes showed his killing intent. Meng was someone recommended by the Prime Minister. He would not put such a person in an important position. On the contrary, he would only find an opportunity to kill him. As long as the negotiation task was not completed, he would have a reason to act. Perhaps it was because of this that Meng was so tactful. Even though he knew that the chances of negotiating were slim, he still wanted to try. What happened next was a tragedy. Meng led a group of over 100 people out of Bangkok to the 5-Star Army's barracks and was successfully instigated to defect. The person who acted was Beta Persei, who had always been by Yang Qindong's side. According to the young master's plan, he first helped Meng analyze the situation, especially standing in Meng's position and talking about many things that might happen in the future. Then he promised that as long as Meng was willing to surrender, not only would he be able to become a general of Siam in the future, even his noble Prime Minister Hamad, who was locked in prison, would be able to become the deputy governor of Siam. Smart people naturally knew how to choose, and Beta Persei was so considerate of him. Meng, who was already at the end of his rope, had no other choice. Thus, after staying in the 5-Star Army's barracks for 5 days, he returned to Bangkok. He only said that the other party disliked his position and needed someone more powerful to negotiate, then he returned to his post. Meng actually came back alive, which was somewhat beyond Chun Huang's expectations. After knowing the 5-Star Army's attitude, he was completely terrified. In short, he did not have the courage to go to the 5-Star Army's barracks to negotiate. Previously he had lied to them about Tongsi, so what could he say now? The 5-Star Army's siege was still ongoing, and it was only a real siege. They did not intend to attack. After the initial fear, Chun Wang became lively again. He made a public statement that although the 5-Star Army was strong, but facing the 400,000-strong army of Bangkok, they did not have the strength to deal with it. Therefore there was no need for everyone to panic. As long as time passed, the surrounding countries and factions would definitely step in, and the matter would be resolved. When Chun Wang's words spread out, it did indeed give the panicked hearts of the people in the city a dose of tranquilizer. Everyone was no longer so afraid. However, the streets began to become chaotic, especially the food in the grain stores, which doubled. There was no other way. No one knew how long this siege would last. Food was the most important thing to the people, so they had to prepare more food. This kind of behavior quickly made Bangkok fall into an extremely awkward situation. No one actually attacked the city, and it was chaotic internally. This really made people not know what to say. Yang Qindong did not have anything to say. His attention was now split between Emerald Island in the south and Yunnan in the north. The siege of Emerald Island had lasted for more than half a year. The so-called king of Dafei, Abu Bakr, had also been trapped in the capital for half a year. After a long siege, the internal chaos had become prominent. It was only a matter of time before they were captured. However, the changes in Yunnan in the north were somewhat unexpected. Under the pincer attack of Nanming and Shiping King, Zhu Huichen finally could not hold on. Then he did something that many people did not expect. He actually contacted the Bangla Kingdom and asked them to send troops to help him attack Shiping King's troops. He also promised that all the captured territory and population would be handed over to the other party, and he would not receive any benefits. In order to survive, Zhu Huichen did not hesitate to betray the interests of his ancestors and even the dignity of the Han people. Such a good thing made the Bangla Kingdom tempted. As the saying goes, if you don't take advantage of benefits, you are a bastard. They really sent out a general, Rajiv, to lead 100,000 troops through the barren mountains and entered the strategic town behind Yunnan to launch a fierce attack. As soon as 100,000 Bangla people appeared, Shiping King Mu Bin was caught off guard. Without any preparation, he repeatedly lost Jiangtu City, Manmo City, and other strategic towns. After losing Mingding City, Mu Bin had no choice but to lead his troops to fight. Zhu Huichen took this opportunity to counterattack. Shiping King's army was defeated. They abandoned their base in Kunming City and fled to Kelisai. Then, letters of request for help were sent to Nanming and the Five-Star Army. Chapter 1052. After receiving the news, Yang Qindong looked at the contents of the telegram, his eyes filled with rage. This is seeking death. He admitted that the appearance of this little butterfly had changed many things, but there was one thing that had not changed, and that was the status of the Han people. Not only did it not fall, but it was also rising. Looking at the Han people under Yang Xie, which one of them did not live with dignity? Which one of them was not proud of their identity as Han people? It was to the point that who knew how many outstanding people from other races wanted to join this group. Regardless of Yang Qindong's attitude towards the Ming dynasty, there was no need to say anything about his attitude towards the Han people. He thought of ways to obtain benefits for them, raise their dignity and change their lives. Seeing that the results were getting better and better, as the descendant of old Zhu Huiping had indeed led the wolf into the house. Just this alone, who knew how many Han people would have no home to return to, who knew how many Han people would have no food to eat, leading to death. Yang Qindong, who attached great importance to the Han people, very quickly gave the order to have the 7th Division, the Heavenly Strategy Division, who was left behind in Yunnan Province, immediately rush to Langshan, and advance 100 li forward to receive all the Han people who had no home to return to due to the chaos of war. He also requested the provinces to take out a portion of the surplus food and send it to the 7th Division to ensure that none of the Han people who rushed over would have problems due to hunger. Under such a decision, who knew how much money and resources would be wasted, but Yang Qindong still did it without hesitation. A person living in this world had to have some goals, some perseverance, so what if he had to pay a price for it? Yang Qindong's words were orders, and they had to be completed without any hesitation. Immediately after the telegram was sent out, the provinces began to move. Telegram to Ma Dali, Menghua and the relevant intelligence personnel hidden in the city. I will only give them 5 days. After 5 days we will launch an attack on Bangkok. Yang Qindong did not want to wait any longer. Based on the current situation, the besieged Bangkok would collapse in at most half a year due to the lack of food. However, the unexpected appearance of the Bangladeshi soldiers had ruined his plan, and he could not continue to wait. Within Bangkok, Menghua was currently standing in the air in his own courtyard. It had been a few days since Menghua had returned to the city. Other than reporting the progress of the peace talks, he had been cooped up in the house and had not gone out. He knew very well that he was in the way of some people because he held military power. This time, it was obvious that they wanted to kill him with a borrowed knife and punish him for his crime. Fortunately, the Five-Star Army didn't want to make things difficult for him. After keeping him for no use, they let him go. Then he found an excuse to get away with it. However, this didn't mean that he was fine. On the contrary, if he didn't know how to restrain himself, he was afraid that there would be bigger problems coming for him. For this reason, he decided to give up his power and stay in seclusion. This way, some people should be able to let go. He had been busy all this while. Naturally, he was not used to stopping abruptly. However, what made Menghua even more dissatisfied was that the streets were too chaotic. Even if he stayed in the courtyard, he could still feel it. He heard from the servants that due to the city gates being sealed, the prices of goods were constantly rising. Some poor people could no longer afford to live, and there were even cases of robbery on the streets. This was why it was so chaotic. There are so many soldiers in the city. Don't they care? Hearing this answer, Menghua's face was full of disbelief. He couldn't understand. With nearly 400,000 Siamese soldiers in the city, how could they cause such chaos? Soldiers? Many of the robbers are actually soldiers in disguise, the servant said with a snort of contempt. Menghua's face immediately turned ugly. He almost forgot that soldiers were not treated well. It was a time of war. How many rich families were willing to send their children to join the army? In order to survive, they had no choice but to do so. When he thought about how even soldiers were robbing on the streets, Menghua could imagine how chaotic the city was. From this, he was even more certain that surrendering to the Five-Star Army was the right choice. At least, if they wanted to solve this chaos, only they could do it. His mentality had changed. When Yang Qindong's order was secretly sent to his residence by the CIA, Menghua decided to cooperate with him. This was also for the sake of fewer Siamese civilians. After all, he couldn't see any hope in the current Siamese government. Remember, the Five-Star Army will attack the South Gate tonight. When you hear the sound of cannons, it's time for you to take action. After the messenger reminded him, he walked out as a delivery man. Looking at the messenger's back, Meng's heart was filled with emotions. Since the beginning of the war, Bangkok had been searching for dangerous people in the city. More than half a year had passed and these people were still in the city. If it was just luck, it wouldn't be reasonable. The most likely explanation was that they had paid for everything. When did Siamese become so decadent? This made it even more impossible for people to see the existence of hope. When Meng received the order, General Chun Hong also received an invitation from Ma Dali. Ma Dali wanted to invite him over for a meal to discuss the future. Although there were emissaries from the five-star army who came with Meng, Ma Dali was still the main force in the negotiations. Chun Hong didn't dare to neglect his request. He immediately brought 30 soldiers and rushed to the diplomatic compound. In his opinion, Bangkok was still the capital of Siamese. It was still his territory. No one would dare to make a move on him. However, he soon realized that he was wrong. What he didn't expect was that Ma Dali had a platoon of guards by his side. It was only because they were well protected that no one was able to see through them. This platoon could play a role in turning the situation around at a critical moment. The sun set and the moon rose. A day of darkness was about to arrive. Meng donned the armor of a general and summoned 50 soldiers in his residence. He was ready for action. Boom! As the night fell, the sound of cannons came as expected. This was the first time that the five-star army had fired the cannons since they besieged the city. It scared the unprepared soldiers and civilians in the city. For a moment, the streets were filled with shouts. Fortunately, there was a curfew in Bangkok. Otherwise, he couldn't imagine what would happen if so many people were running around on the streets. The cannons finally sounded. Meng led 50 soldiers out of his residence and headed straight for the dungeon. The first thing he wanted to do was to rescue Prime Minister Hamad. This was also the condition of surrender that Meng had proposed. Yang Qindong had readily agreed to it. Meng led his soldiers out of the residence. This news was quickly discovered by the Siamese spies in charge of keeping an eye on the area. The news was then spread. General Meng was naturally unaware of all this. Now that he had decided to take action, he couldn't care less. With his identity as the deputy general guarding the royal capital, Meng entered the dungeon without much effort. He saw Prime Minister Hamad locked up in the innermost cell. At this moment, Hamad didn't have the slightest demeanor of a prime minister. His hair was disheveled and his body reeked of a foul stench. He wasn't much better than a beggar on the streets. However, his eyes were still very bright. When he saw Meng leading a group of soldiers in front of him and breaking the lock on the cell, he sighed and said, "Sigh, why bother? Prime Minister, it's not that I didn't do it because I knew the law. You have been wronged. Tong Si's matter was clearly done by a despicable person. The king was also worried that your achievements would shock the emperor. That's why he took the blame." Meng said with tears in his eyes. "But you?" Hamad seemed to want to say something, but he quickly shook his head and asked, "Tell me, what's the situation outside?" "Prime Minister, the five-star army has already surrounded the royal capital. The royal capital could be breached at any moment. Due to the jealousy of Chun Hong, I was sent to negotiate with the five-star army a few days ago. I almost lost my life and surrendered to them." When he said the last sentence, Meng lowered his head. After all, no matter the reason, surrendering to the enemy wasn't something to be proud of. He was really afraid that Prime Minister would reprimand him. Hearing that a general was sent to negotiate, an indescribable anger flashed across Hamad's face. He then sighed and said, "Forget it. If that's the case, I'm afraid that the fate of Siam will come to an end. No one can reverse it. Prime Minister, the five-star army has already agreed. After breaching the royal capital, you will be the deputy governor here. I will be the general here. As long as we care for the people of Siam, we can still do many things for them." Without the storm that he imagined, Meng raised his head and said with a hopeful expression, "Ah." Before Prime Minister could reply, a burst of laughter sounded behind him. A group of 200 people suddenly appeared. The one at the front was a dark-skinned man. After he laughed, he said, "You really betrayed Siam. If that's the case, then prepare to die." "Captain Lick?" Meng turned his head. When he saw who it was, his face was filled with shock. Lick was the captain of Ha Chuanwang's guards and was deeply trusted. Although his rank was slightly low, in Siam where Gordon and the other generals died, he was already considered a famous general. Since he appeared here, needless to say, it must be Hamad's order. With the appearance of Lick, a battle to the death was unavoidable. Looking at the 50 personal guards who had come with him and then seeing that there were 200 opponents, Meng Wu only hesitated for a moment before he drew his sword. He looked at the other party and said, "Since that's the case, there's no point in saying anything more. Let me see your skills." Kill. Kill? More than 200 people began to fight each other. The clashing sounds of swords and sabers rang out incessantly as they fought in the small dungeon. The soldiers that followed Meng Wu were not only loyal, they were also more skilled than normal soldiers. If it was on the battlefield, it wouldn't be difficult for 50 of them to fight 200 people. However, Lick was not to be trifled with. The 200 people that he brought this time were also veterans of the battlefield. They had the ability to fight 1 against 2. Although they were weaker than the soldiers on the other side, they had the advantage in numbers. When it came to a fight, their advantage was very obvious. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.